All right, we are live. Welcome, everybody, to episode 4. Today is April 30th, 2025, and we have two special guests this evening. First off, we have the return of Brendan, back from his grand adventures across the country, helping with Grindstone and what have you. And we also have Aaron, who has been our gracious co host while Brendan's been out. Please welcome them all to the show. Thank you guys for being here. I'm really looking forward to this. It was a nice surprise that Brendan was finally back. I've been wanting Aaron and Brendan to meet for a while. They both come from the same area, so that is a great thing to get them introduced to each other. So tonight we're going to start off with Brendan giving us an update on his adventures before we roll out to the next segment. Brendan, take it away.
Yeah, so I have been all over the country the last couple of weeks. I was telling you, I've been to 10 states in the last 80 days. Not all grindstone deployments. Some of them were checking on some spider points and some homesteads. I have a couple of buddies out of state and just spending some FaceTime with them and then helping them with some of their systems. So that was cool.
Yeah.
It was one of those things. I was up in that area anyway, and it was make a 7-hour drive and go spend a week with a buddy before I make the 13-hour drive home. So
Yeah. That makes great special moments. You know,
Yeah.
um, you know, I'm sure guys all over the country from Grindstone, and some of these guys might just be friends anyways. So I think it's probably really good that you guys get to connect when it's not a Grindstone event.
Well, it's very cool too in the because a lot of these guys, it's just the guys, right? So you meet the dude, you work with the dude for a couple of days, you stay in contact over the phone, and if you're up in that area, you get to see their wives and their children and how they interact as people with their wives and their children.
Mhm.
You could it's easy to keep up a facade for 3 or 4 days on a job site.
Yeah.
I want to see how you interact with your family. Are you yelling at your wife constantly? Are you guys getting aggravated at each other? Are your kids, kind of like hushed mouth and looking at the ground whenever you're around? There's things you want to pay attention about
Mhm.
people, which thankfully I haven't run across any of that working with grindstone guys. But it's
Well, that's
just
always a good thing.
it's just another indicator. You want to when you're vetting people out, how do they run their homestead? Are they completely off grid in the mountains of Kentucky where they're so far in that they literally got a pipe in the sunshine? I was at one buddy's place. We were literally hiking, kicking coal out of the side of the mountain because that's how deep in the holler we were. I've got some lying around here. I brought it back for my son,
Oh
but
boy.
like the closest utilities to him are over a mile away. You know, and to watch him interact with that environment with him and his family, and they're all in it together. Like wife's handling chores, kids handling chores. Like it was obviously a team effort. There was
Mhm.
nobody slacking off in that situation. And then you go over and I got to run through Johnson City and Jonesboro, which is where we did the Helene deployment last year. And man, they're going to see the scars from that hurricane for the next 10 years. There's still debris in the streets. Went by some of the old neighborhoods we were working in. There's still houses that have a bunch of damage. You know, they're rebuilding. They're definitely rebuilding, but they're going to feel those scars for a long time. That's for sure.
Well, when you were up for that deployment, we hear a lot about North Carolina. We hear a little bit about Tennessee. I didn't realize it really went that far west um, because of the news coverage, basically. So, did you see any kind of difference in the damage, like the extent or the type of damage, out of the three different locations? North Carolina, Tennessee, Arkansas.
You talking from Helene?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So the areas I was in, so when I was up there, I bounced around, did some work in Elizabethton, some work in Jonesboro, some work out in up in Bristol, and then over in North Carolina. I can't remember the name of the town I went to in North Carolina, but a lot of Unicoi County in that area. Um, so North Carolina, I noticed a lot more tree damage and wind damage. At least in the part I was in. Um, Elizabethton, I have a picture somewhere of Elizabethton before and after the storm, where the before is an overview shot of the city, and the after, you can see one building, and then you realize you only see one story of one building, and then when you look at the before, you realize that it is the 4-story courthouse.
Wow.
Um, because you get 4 foot of flooding, which, yeah, 4 foot of flooding is bad. 4 foot of flooding is worse when you're in the bottom of a valley and all that flooding goes down into the valley and your 4 foot has turned into 18 foot. There were no water lines on any of the houses because the water went above the roofs, you know. There were a lot of bodies getting pulled out of attics because people would go hide in their attics and they had no way out. That one, Elizabethton, the flooding that happened there was pretty bad. And then all the downstream effects from that too, you know. A lot of problems. And Jonesboro was kind of up the side of the mountain, as to my understanding, so they didn't get as bad a flooding as Elizabethton, but a lot of debris damage, a lot of building damage. Just every fence had been pushed over. Um, I have pictures of brick houses where, you know, the wall facing the mountain is just completely wiped out, pushed into the house. Bunch of stuff like that.
Wow. Craziness. Whew. All right.
It's
All right.
rough when you're not used to it as a state,
Yeah,
recovering from that.
yeah, that makes a big difference. It's one of the reasons why I brought it up, because you hear about tornadoes in the Midwest, which is going to impact you differently than a hurricane. So sometimes more uh, devastation comes from a tornado, but it's in a confined space. But what's the impacts of the wind damage from, in the flood damage from the hurricane, which you don't get with the tornado? So, and a lot of times, areas are not built for weather that they have not experienced before. So that's pretty interesting. That'll make one, just incredible documentary if anybody ever takes the time to sit there and document just that one storm, Helene, and what it did to those several states. All right. Well, Brendan, thank you for the update. We will roll into segment one. Our final portion of our YouTube influencers theme is going to be CivMil influencer. Now, a CivMil influencer, by my definition, is someone that is either former Leo, former military, or someone that grew up in the firearms industry, okay, and tries to replicate military type equipment, gear, tactics on the civilian population. So there's all kinds of guys on YouTube and the internet and stuff. They do training and gear and ideology and everything else. Warrior Poet, he's one that I personally like. The guy from T-Rex Arms. What are some of the guys that you guys have followed that you like?
For me, I've been enjoying a lot of the work that a guy named Rhett Newmeyer does. He's got a company called Demonstrated Concepts, and he's been playing around with a lot of cheek load only shooting. Mm-hmm. So that's been pretty interesting to see, like what he's been pulling off with managing a 12 gauge with a bird's eye grip and just puts it up to his cheek, and he's running that thing like a scalded dog. And he also talks about hunting in dense brush and how having a stockless AR, 300 blackout, he's over there hunting elk where he lives. It's easier to maneuver that smaller envelope, through that dense brush. He's probably one of the big ones. Some of the other guys, like Craig Douglas, the guys from ShivWorks, that some of the former military guys, because I usually come at it more from the civilian side. I don't like dressing up in fancy clothes and going and role playing for a weekend. So but yeah, Warrior Poet's another good one. He's done a lot to go out there and train with people. So
yeah. What about you, Brendan?
I don't watch a whole lot of content. Some of the guys as far as like, I'm not huge into the tactical side of it. I've had a handful of training hands-on with a bunch of people like that, and I appreciate that, but I don't watch a whole heck of a lot of content. Some of the ones I do, so like Sheriff of Baghdad, he's I can't remember, John McPhee, I think his name is.
Yep.
Yeah, he's a real good one. And then the other ones would be more practicality guys. So Paul Harrell, when he was alive, his brother's taken it over, but he does a pretty good job as well.
Very cool. Yeah, and there's so many different ways of the trainers to approach these things. Now, I like Tactical Hive. Those guys, I can't name drop because I can't really remember most of their names, but I've watched probably the most videos of them because I really connected with how they were doing training. Now, watching videos, to me, it's more about theory consumption, and you can connect on how they're doing it. But until you apply that theory, you're not really going to be able to make the great improvements and stuff. But they're using a lot of the tactical tactics there. But I know like PJ and Bear, those guys, I've never really seen videos of them doing that kind of stuff, but they do mention in the past a lot, paper plates, do this from this distance, okay? Kind of roughing it out. They don't really, from what I've seen, they don't really get down to precision, grips and all that stuff. Just like get out there, put the plate up, do this between this distance. If not, keep doing it. Or go get some training and then do it again. So, which I like that style too, because I think that really applies to a lot of guys that are not trained. They don't really know how to shoot. They might own a bunch of guns, but they don't train, which is too common.
Most of the gun owners in America.
Yeah.
So I don't know if he's ever done a video on it, but just from talking with him and personal experience with him. So TJ, Bear Independent, his rule of thumb for how he trains is a 3x5 card at the longest distance he regularly attends, which he's done the math. The furthest points in the Refuge Medical Warehouse is 43 yards. So he trains on drawing from concealed and putting 2 rounds in a 3x5 card at 43 yards. And it's just something that I thought was really interesting. So if you do that, for years, I always did my training off my bedroom door to my front door.
Right.
From concealed, stop the threat where the most likely threat is to be. It's like, yeah, it's cool to shoot out 250, 300 yards, but if the guy's right on top of you and you don't have a second to think, or vice versa, if you only ever train point shooting and gut shooting, but the guys was I can't remember the kid's name at the food court a few years back, made a 40-yard shot, fired 6 rounds, all 6 hit center mass,
Or that guy at the church several years ago.
Maybe Zachary. Yeah, the guy, the old man over in the church in Texas.
Yes.
Yeah, that guy too.
Amazing. Whew.
He 38-yard shot, one round from a 357 that he was, Pop had probably been carrying for 40 freaking years.
Right.
Yeah.
he punched that dude's ticket. I mean, that's a heck of a shot to make in a pretty noisy and stressful environment.
People running in between you. And
yeah. To me, with those kind of shots, look, we watch all kinds of movies and shows where the soldier or the FBI agent or whatever, they're just like, boom, and they're, popping them in the head, and so they don't hit the hostage. I cannot shoot like that. It's hard for me even to fathom to be that accurate. It's one thing shooting at a target, paper target, but with all the physical and everything, all the stimulation going around you, it seems to me to be that kind of good. It just got to be muscle memory. You're not even aiming. You're not like trying to line up the dot on the sights. You're just doing it.
And not only that, all the stimulus affecting your accuracy. Well, what are other people doing around you? I saw a video a couple weeks back. It was over in Ukraine, and they were brand new Russian conscripts. I believe they were Russian. They could have been Ukrainian. And they get hit. Everybody scatters. They're trying to back out of this room. They were approaching a stairwell. And they get hit. They're all falling back. And as they're falling back, they're turning around, shooting into the room. And guys are wandering in between guys shooting. And at least 2 guys got fucking hit in the back of the head from friendly fire. And just dropped right there. And you're like, hey, you've got guys like a lot of people, they tunnel vision,
Yeah.
And unless you are training yourself in high stress situations, which is very difficult to do,
Yeah.
how are you going to avoid that tunnel vision to see your buddy wandering in front of your muzzle, because he's in tunnel vision too, so he doesn't hear that you're blasting 4 foot behind his head.
Right. I saw a similar video recently, and I could have swore it was about IDF guys doing, they were clearing a building against Hamas. It just reminds me of that same video. And the thing is, again, we watch so many movies and shows, and everybody is soft, and that's not how most combat is done. You got young kids with barely any training, okay, and just reacting that first time. And I mean, luckily for me, I've never been in that situation where I've been shot at. So I can talk about it, but really, what reference do I have other than this, entertainment? And it kind of like, I try to give cops the benefit of the doubt in some ways, because people always make fun of police because they're mag dumping 60 rounds into some guy and they don't hit anybody.
Yep.
Those guys don't again, they're not soft guys. They barely get any training just shooting the gun, let alone in high tension situations.
The average police officer usually will just go out and qualify twice a year.
Yep.
And they may go to the range to make sure that they can qualify that twice a year. But there's a lot of departments that are getting better about that now, but there's a lot of them that do not have a culture of training.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, that's been for the last 2 generations. They tried to weed all the lawyers out. Because lawyers get you use of force lawsuits. Lawyers show up on camera, beating on some poor, disadvantaged inner city youth. And it doesn't look good to mama. So
right, we'll spend money or get the donation, then spend money on MRAPs.
Yeah,
okay? We're okay with that militarization of the police, but not, hey, let's give them the accurate skills so they don't kill bystanders. Or maybe if they have the skills, then they might be willing to take those extra seconds to not draw because they have the confidence that if they need to, I
remember the FBI report that killed the 40 cal round came out in, I think it was 2014, and they surveyed a bunch of national police shootings all over, and they found that miss rate was in the high 80%, like 88, 89%. for officer-involved shootings by the cops themselves. And then if you took out like 4 departments that have built a culture of marksmanship, like the LAPD has their bonus course where they will actually pay you extra money to use their ammo to go to the range and shoot. And if you qualify once a month with that bonus course, and like it's a pretty hard course of fire, but if you qualify once a month, they'll give you a couple $100 extra bucks. So, the ammo is free, the range time's free.
Yeah.
And now you're incentivized. It's like, but you take those 4 departments out that are like that, and then you start seeing like 90+% misses, especially when you add in places like New York that have to have that New York trigger, which is about 12 pounds.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it kind of leads to, okay, you see the shifts in pistol requirements of like which handgun that they issue in the different branches of the military, and then you're getting the manufacturers involved to sit there and do bids and stuff like that. And you have something similar with the police, 9mm versus 40 cal or 45. And some people don't like 9mm because it doesn't have the stopping power of 40 cal or 45. I mean, if you don't have the accuracy, it's not going to matter anyways.
Yep. Like caliber wars are over. The winner is shot placement.
Yeah.
So nationally, the average right now for like getting into a defensive shooting is about 2 to 4 rounds per person that you're involved with to conclusively deal with it. So you got to think, if you have like a revolver, do you have a 2 bad guy gun, or do you have a bad guy and a half gun? Are you basing your assumptions on what you carry on a daily basis off of the idea that you're just going to be that accurate on probably one of the worst days of your life?
Yeah. Well,
it's pretty scary stuff.
Yeah. Well, here's what's kind of interesting to me. So if you watch all the influencers, basically your handgun is to get you to your rifle. Okay? But that's not how the police are operating,
Yeah.
And we're lucky if a cop has a long gun in their car. And in this day, it should be standard issue. Okay. And I'm not talking, the full 16-inch. I'm talking SBR. You should have an SBR in your car because, that range of motion, it's already crowded in a cop car.
Yeah.
And I don't know because I know in the old days, they used to have a shotgun rack in between the passenger seat, okay, and the steering wheel. I don't know if the modern squad cars have that still, if it's even practical. But if you have the space there, then I don't know why you couldn't just put barrel down on an SBR. But then if the cops are leaving their doors, I mean, I don't know if they automatically lock when they close them, or if they're chasing a perp and then the doors are open. Can they get to the SBR or the shotgun? A lot of dynamics there. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
So I know the old shotgun rigs, they were locked in place. So you had to have a key to get that out. I would assume a long gun rig would be the same. It's like a C-clamp that goes around the barrel.
Yeah. So most of the guys that I know that are in different departments, like over in Georgia, they're carrying a center console rig, and they actually have the weapon mounted up, barrel up, because if you put the barrel down and you try to maneuver that into a tight vehicle, they'll have that as a designated marksman rig, so they can respond to active shooters or whatever. Putting an AR in a vehicle is not that difficult. It's not a huge expense. Everybody's getting back to cheaper gun parts now.
Yeah. Or even folding stock too. So
yeah. Well, like most of those guys, it seems like if they have it as staged in a way, you want as few things to screw with to be able to get that weapon engaged, because you hope you're going to have to, you have the time to go and get it and stage it and everything. But, that might be the question of, I got ambushed in my car. Well, do I want to respond to this with a pistol or a rifle caliber round? Like anybody who shoots much knows that shooting a rifle is a lot easier. You got 3 points of contact, managing recoil is a lot easier, and you start getting a little bit into ballistics, and you understand that there's a huge qualitative difference between using a rifle to make holes in something that's pissing you off, and doing the same with a pistol.
Well, I think we need mag dumping if they were sporting SBRs. Now, you know, you pull up in the car, you swing the door open, your instinct is to get on the scene and do whatever. You're adding how much? 5-10 seconds to swing around the back, open up the back, you know, using the SUV model of a car or your trunk on of a police cruiser. Now, I would hope that their rifle is staged, slings ready, just ready to. But I mean, I would think even if you don't want to deploy it right then, sling it and move.
Yeah. Well, and you can tell a lot about a guy by how he stages his gear. Yeah. So, you know, after doing a few years of the training and getting around different people from different backgrounds, like I look for little things like, how do you fold your sling? Is it kept on with a little tiny rubber band that you can just literally yank it and pop that rubber band off and have that rifle on in 2 seconds? Or is it, you know, is that rifle underneath a bunch of crap in your trunk? And, you know, if you have to go get it, you're going to have to, are you doing it after a high-speed chase? Yeah. Yeah. Well, like little things too, like tourniquets. You know, I've seen a lot more cops start to carry a tourniquet on their belt.
Yeah.
You know, on their duty belt. Yep. Yeah. Is that a cat? Softy, yeah.
Yeah. It has a much larger band, and I have a fella in my mag who I can't get a cat around his legs, so I switched to that. Plus, it's a smaller form fit for everyday pocket carry.
Yeah, I do the cat tourniquets or the soft T wide.
Yeah,
are the two that I standardized on. We've had a guy, Franklin Little, come in and teach us a bunch of medical stuff. I try to take his class every year just to make sure that information's fresh. But seeing some of the stuff that passes for tourniquets, and then you see people that, you know, oh, I haven't taken much med courses, so, you know, I'll put the tourniquet on you, and I can use this phone cord, right? It's just, you know, I can put a slip knot in here, and then I've got to loosen it up every 20 minutes, right? No.
My thing is when people get like belts and they want to crank down a belt, and then they realize, oh, well, there's no holes where your arm diameter is. Now, how do I cinch it?
Yeah.
And make a hole real quick as you're bleeding out.
I was laughing when you were talking earlier about your buddy having the gun pointed up. So I grew up dirt poor in Dover, so I knew a lot of poachers. we'll say new, and that was one like standard operating procedure was barrel up as you're driving. May or may not be spotlighting a tree line.
Yeah,
but because if your butt stock's up, you can't get that out the window. But if your barrel's up, it's just out the window. Yep. So, as quick acquisition. It just made me think of that. I could see where that'd be very practical for law enforcement.
So the way most of the squared-away guys that I've seen are doing it with the center console rig is they'll basically C-clamp it and use their other hand to hit the disengage, and then they just punch the barrel straight out, whatever direction they're shooting out of their vehicle. Usually, like most of the guys I know, we did a course over here a couple of years ago. I bring in a guy from South Africa every year. Well, not during COVID, but we're back on schedule again.
Yeah.
But we did a course where we actually got to shoot up Ford Windstar and see what penetration was on different types of rounds and everything. It really changes your perspective on how you deal with the idea of being ambushed in a car.
Cars are concealment, not cover.
Yeah, there is very little cover on a civilian vehicle. Like you can get behind the axles and hope that somebody's not skipping rounds off the ground, or you can get right behind the engine block and hope somebody doesn't just freaking ankle shoot you. You know, and that's about it. So we looked with that at, okay, let's do more mobility. You know, get the heck out, like start moving, get out of, because the difference between a car and a coffin is, you know, about 5 seconds if you have rounds incoming. So.
You know, in the movies, I was, you know, as I've got more into firearms, I always wondered, why did the perps always shoot at the top of the cars? Why don't they just either angle down so it all skips under the car? You just, scatter the fire, or get on the ground and do it. Only the good guy does it to get the bad guy. Like the bad guys are too stupid to do the same thing.
It makes the movie last longer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
those
do you
movies are
guys
super
know the
pro.
old meme about how 50 cal is for when the bad guy's hiding in your neighbor's house behind the fridge?
Yeah.
So
Or the old 150 cal, screw you, the guy behind you and the 10 guys behind him.
right. So there's a dude on YouTube called the Fat Electrician, and he decided to test that. And he wanted to see what is the lowest caliber you could shoot through a stick frame house into a neighboring house through a fridge and then hit a ballistics dummy. 9mm out of 16-inch barrel.
Yep.
Really? Huh.
It punched through 2 exterior walls, 2 interior walls, a fridge, and the ballistics dummy. The 22 went through all of that and dented the fridge. So it's like people get this concept of, I need a bedside rifle, which, don't get me wrong, I like rifles. I've got a rifle right here behind me. But I've switched my bedside gun to a 12 gauge because if I shoot somebody with this AK, I'm hitting my neighbor 60 yards away across the street. It's you gotta be.
There's no through and through with the shotgun.
Right.
Well, it
if it's a
depends.
slug, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's the slugs, and even we did a lot of penetration tests on different shotgun loads with buckshot. Because we found that birdshot, everybody was always saying, well, get birdshot so you don't over penetrate. And I actually was helping a couple of buddies of mine. They developed a shotgun course, so they brought me into the combative side of it. And we were teaching. We'd pattern a lot of different loads. We'd have everybody bring in all your loads and let's see how they perform. And those birdshot, we had multiple slides of ER pictures of somebody that had been peppered with birdshot, and they drove around for a couple hours beforehand and then went to the ER. Yeah, well, even the turkey loads, most of those, we settled on the 2 3/4 inch shells, because if you look at turkeys, you're going to have one shot at it, and then it's the whole flock's gone. That's, you don't have to worry about follow-up shots. But with those 2 3/4 inch shells, there's federal flight control makes their law enforcement round. They've got a 9 pellet and an 8 pellet, and that is one of the tightest patterning
double
rounds. But double lot. But every round, on their 8 pellet, is about 30 caliber in size. So
single
imagine, pretty much. I mean, imagine shooting somebody with how many 30 caliber rounds at that point, 8, 9. So they.
Your arm,
but I mean,
your arm coming off your shoulder with that.
Yeah, well, and they, there's a guy named Clint Smith who's been training over. He's a national treasure, but he's been training for probably 40 years, screaming at people on the range. And one of my favorite quotes from him is, pistols make holes in people, rifles make holes through people. A shotgun at the right distance with the right load and properly targeted scoops out a chunk from that person and throws it on the ground. And I know this is a family-friendly show, so I won't use the exact words that he said, but you get the gist of it. You don't shoot somebody with a shotgun, you smite them. So that's for home defense rounds. That's the bedside gun for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I like too. Is the so it's triple lot is .35, 35 caliber. Double lot is 33 caliber. Single lot's 30 caliber. Number 1 is 24 caliber, if I recall correctly. And so I keep a double barrel coach gun by the bed, and the left barrel is 24 pellet single lot. I'm sorry, not single lot, number 1. And then the right barrel is 3-inch turkey load, which is They're 177 balls. They're stainless steel BBs,
Yeah.
like Daisy BBs. You shoot a BB gun with.
That's I wouldn't say that's like a BB. That's probably like a ball bearing at that point. So,
Especially if you got 100 of them coming at you.
yeah, it's coming out of there angry.
I got a question for you. On a 9mm in that 16-inch barrel. So was the penetration because of the higher velocity than would normally come through a pistol with that
They
round?
didn't try a pistol, so I couldn't tell you.
So 9mm is normally shot out of a handgun.
Right.
Okay. So even my, my 9mm rifle, okay, my AR pistol, it's a shorter barrel, so it's like 8.5 inches. So was it that 9mm able to make the penetrations that
Might
it
have
did?
been a 10-inch barrel. Now that I think about it, it was an AR style. It might have been less than, but it was big, definitely bigger than a rifle.
Okay.
Bigger than a pistol.
Yeah. But if I shot that same round out of a pistol at the same distance, would it get the same penetration? That would be because I'm wondering if if the longer the barrel, does the velocity increase across the board when it comes to calibers?
Definitely.
So you get a lot of that data out of the hood. Because when you see rounds that a couple of hood rats have a shootout, a lot of those rounds are more addressed to whom it may concern. And you see 40 cals and 9mm all the freaking time, man. And like they'll go through the exterior walls, they go through windows, like they bounce off of stuff. They do weird things when they hit studs in the walls, and you'll have them like travel up the stud and come out, the next level of the apartment. Just
because they're probably all using FMJ as well. Because if they're using defensive rounds,
they'll use whatever they can get a hold of.
Yeah.
they like most of the guys I've seen where they're you're looking at their guns and what they're buying, they're literally just using whatever they can get a hold of.
Yeah.
And if it's hollow points, like some of the guys, they have the switches have gotten real popular over the last couple of years. So they put the Google switch on the back of the Glock, and they get it from Wish or Temu or whatever, and then put that 150 round drum mag on the bottom of the Glock. It used to be the old 33 round mags, but they just hold that trigger down and talk about a mag dump.
Yeah. And I wonder what the jam rate is on those things, because I know Magpul has the drums and stuff, and I started getting one several years ago when it was all new. But I was like, man, just even if you throw it on a rifle, I mean, I don't know. It just seems to me that the higher the amount of rounds you're going to have, the higher your likelihood of having jams.
Drums in general are inherently flawed. So every country that has ever put a drum magazine in service has replaced it within 2 years, which, if you know anything about government acquisition, when they put something in, they want it to last as long as possible.
Yeah.
Like I've got drums for my AKs, and that is a tried and true platform that has been worked on and perfected for the last 70 freaking years. And I still get 1 or 2 jams per 75 round drum. And that's in semi-auto, it's not even full. So I can't imagine a blowback handgun not having constant stovepipes or failure to feed or failure to eject or.
Yeah.
So you'll see them. Usually they'll post up around like 4th of July, or if they're having block parties. And you do see some jams, because they'll just point their guns at the sky and hold the trigger down until it jams. But a lot of times they're still getting 60 or 70 rounds out of there, which is about 71 rounds more than I would want to have heading down range at me.
Yeah. All right. So what are some of the items, say gear? All right, we'll start with gear. So what is some of the gear that has transitioned from military use to civilian use that you think is practical, and what's novelty? So
a lot of the plate carriers are fairly practical, but the way most people set them up and market them is for novelty. We have a guy that wants to dress up as a ninja on the weekends and go burn a bunch of magazines with his friends,
Mm-hmm.
and he's got a $900 Cry or Spiritus system set up, and it becomes a status symbol. But then you look at a lot of the guys that came through the Great War on Terror, and they're still using a Condor plate carrier that's mostly used by airsofters now, and they're running a basic 7 mag loadout on their cummerbund, and then typically a dump pouch and mid kit. And is it Gucci? No. Is
Well,
that guy probably going to be able to work that better than the other dude who's the CivMil influencer is trying to sell you a $500 plate carrier than the $400 a piece ceramic plates that go in it?
And to touch on what you were saying, like a lot of the times you'll see, so like the guys out doing it for a job, like you said, they've got 7 mags, an IFAK, and a dump pouch. A lot of the guys here, they've got 40 pounds of junk on it, and it's only 2 or 3 mags on the entire rig.
All the goo guys.
Yeah.
I used to have some of my friends that when they deploy with Blackwater and go overseas, so you could always see the guys that were cops that didn't have a military background, and they were just coming straight into a deployment, because they'd hang every piece of crap that they could get out of an Army Navy store off their mag carrier. And if you get that, if you're in Afghanistan or Iraq, it's hot. It's really, really freaking hot. So it's like you can usually tell he's like about 60 days afterwards, if you've ever had your eye on a piece of Gucci gear. He's like, you can usually buy it off those guys pretty cheap, because it's like, I just ship it back home.
Yeah. Well, they need a little bit of the hiking methodology of ounces equals pounds. So, and you learn the hard way, just like hikers do.
Well, you also learn where you want to put your weight distribution.
Yeah.
Things like water and a radio and extra ammo are pretty cool. You don't need 10 sets of flex cuffs and a collapsible baton and and on there. I'd rather have another magazine.
Yeah. Well, the weather is a big factor. Now, depending on what vehicles these guys are getting in and out of, are they getting out of a Humvee, an up-armored Humvee, an MRAP, an APC? I mean, the more stuff you have on your rig, the more stuff you can get caught and get, those spaces are not for comfort.
So a lot of those guys were getting in and out of the GMC Yukons. They had an up-armored version of that, but like Blackwater had one of the contracts they had for a long time was with the State Department, and they did force protection for State Department personnel, and also did like personal security details for diplomats that were visiting in different countries and stuff. And we were trying to do a bunch of that nation building, so you'd see that. I mean, they'd slim down, or go slimline, but when you have to move a principal all day and he wants to stop and press the flesh over here, shaking hands with people, and okay, I got to get out of the car again. It's the 4th time this hour, dude. We're in an IED-rich environment. Why?
Well, there's so many vendors in the space for armor, and it goes beyond like the quality. Let's just assume they're all making using good steel. They want to charge you extra for the splatter, the resin that you put on there to stop the spalling. Okay. But then you saw this trend, and I saw this with Spartan. Okay. And, so you had your regular plates, you had your cummerbund with the side plates, which is heavy. Okay. But it gives you more protection on the side. But then you had your active shooter cut, but basically it's just no cummerbund. And you still got the same size front and back plates, pressure pads for any of these setups if you wanted. But then you had like swimmer's cut, which was even smaller.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to me, not being in the space, I wasn't deployed with armor. It's like, I mean, you're already only covering a small amount of you anyways, your vital organs. You start going to swimmer's cut and everything else. I mean, why are you going to wear armor? I mean, because your angle, of protection is shrinking as you're going with a slimmer cut. So, you guys got any opinion on the ideology for that, other than we're just saving some weight because your your risk reward for the weight loss seems to be not a good choice.
So for me, in my purposes, all of my armor is pretty much relegated to static positions. That is, it all goes down tomorrow and we're setting up LPOPs or we're setting up checkpoints. Armor is attached to that. I have no intention on throwing it on and running around. I've patrolled in armor, not with the military, but with other organizations, and it ain't fun.
Yeah.
Even soft armor is a bitch after. Oops, sorry, is is not comfortable after a couple of hours. So I have no intention on running around with it. But it is practical in the sense of if you are in a static position or you are in an area that is a known threat. You're 6 guys driving down the streets of Kabul. Yeah, I'm gonna want it. Me hanging around in small town Florida. Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah. What about you,
To me,
Harry?
that's kind of like my first question that I ask myself whenever I'm talking gear is, what's my mission? And then once you define that, it's a lot easier to figure out what goes and what stays. Um, so for me, like we were looking, I was pretty interested. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the INFAC Coalition. It was a black
Yes.
supremacist group, and they shut down Stone Mountain, Georgia, a few years ago.
Yeah.
So looking at something like that, which is a little bit more likely for me to have to deal with that than the end of the world as we know it, complete societal collapse. I looked at having a smaller plate carrier that would fit underneath a baggy shirt, and then having just a 3 to 6 rounds or three to six magazines on it. And that way I'm not standing out in the crowd. I'm not super militaristic. If you can have a flannel button up shirt and then just reach inside, you leave it open till about the middle button, reach inside, and that's your magazines that you're inserting in there. Um, that that to me is more like the partisan stuff that we've talked about a little bit. That book, The Reluctant Partisan,
Yeah.
where you're still having to move through society and you need to worry about how you're seen after this. Because I like the idea of being able to put something away too. Because if cops respond to shots fired, right, and I'm running around with looking like Mr. Tactical, and they're already amped up because they're thinking they just want to go home that night to while they're driving over in the cruiser.
Yep.
And we already talked about what national accuracy rates are with cops. So even if they're not shooting at me, they still might shoot me. I'd prize mobility and the ability to get away from a scene and something like that and fade back into the crowd and just be another, 38-year-old dad with a giant beard wearing a flannel shirt.
Yeah.
But like some of the other plate carriers that I have set up where they've come out a couple of times during hurricanes because the mission profile has changed a lot. And there's a little bit of that deterrence there. We had during I think it was, I don't remember if it was Helena Milton. All the streets were flooded out in Plant City.
Milton.
And yeah, so it was pretty gnarly out there. But there was a sedan driving around at about 3 o'clock in the morning with 4 military-aged males that all had an ethnicity in common that was not mine. And their car flooded out. And it's like, why would you be driving around with 4 dudes? Oh, you're looking to loot. Great. Mm-hmm. that's what this hurricane needs is jerks like you guys.
Yeah.
So
there's so much of that. Every deployment I go to with Grindstone, there have been situations where Grindstone has handled looters, but unfortunately during Helene we had a couple, not our people, but another 501c3 people got shot.
Yeah.
guys come in from out of state, want to rob a distribution center and take the stuff and sell it in another state. That stuff happens every single deployment.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go on one of those deployments now unarmed. Like, I would certainly be able to see my own, my own safety going into an area like that.
SOP for all of us is at minimum rifle and handgun.
Yeah. Well, that also can help a little bit, like, depending on if you're having to go talk with somebody who's in official capacity and they're probably tired and overworked, like being able to throw a shirt over your armor. But that makes sense to me. But then also, I look at that as if I'm guarding something, maybe having a more overt plate carrier, and because you don't have to be the most tactical guy in the world, you just have to be harder than the next target, so that you get deselected and that can become somebody else's problem. So
yeah,
that's certainly one of my preferences.
Yeah, well, like you said earlier, it depends on the mission. So if you're, out and about in the public space, low profile is definitely the way to go. But if you're in your space, then a higher profile is definitely more worthy because you don't know who's peeping the scene.
Yeah.
And at the time and how long they're doing it. And, people that are going to do bad stuff tend to go to where there's the least resistance.
Mm-hmm.
So if they know there's a guy posted up, they're just going to move on to the next one until all the low-hanging fruit is gone.
Well, it's that whole risk-reward adjustment, right?
Yeah.
Like you see that with everybody, and especially in a grid down situation or post-disaster situation. We talked last time about people who were dangerous. To me, like that'll change your risk-reward if you're stealing for your kids, or if that those people have a truck full of generators. And it's all profit to me, but I know I can go get $1,200 a generator right now. Just nobody has them. Mm-hmm. Like now, all of a sudden, 50 generators just became 60 grand in cash.
Yeah,
and that just changed your value as a target quite a bit. So that's one of the things where I look at, okay, guys, like if we have a bunch of squared away dudes out here walking around with rifles, like we're gonna make it pretty obvious that it's going to be a two-way gunfight.
Oh yeah. Well, I'll save this next comment for when we do segment 2 because this kind of segues into it. But I want to run on this a little bit more. So, we'll assume that body armor is defensive. Okay, that's pretty much what it is. It's defensive, protective. Mm-hmm. What is a more offensive piece of gear that's come over from the military side and the civilian side, and how is it more practical or more novelty?
So for me, the practical stuff is the pouches. And it seems dumb, right? And I know you've seen me do this a lot. Grenade pouches, flashbang pouches, and dump pouches. I can't get enough of them. I throw them on everything. My chainsaw rigs, like my chainsaw chaps, have a dump pouch on the side where I keep my hatchet and all my wedges.
Uh-huh.
All my radios, I keep in old flashbang pouches because they're cheap. You can get a 10-pack for 20 freaking bucks, Hand grenade pouches. When we first met, I would pass out the little first aid kits. It was a couple sets of rolled wound packing gauze and what was it? The petroleum infused gauze for chest seals, impromptu chest seals. And I'd always just pass those out to people just as a friendly "how are you doing" gift. So, like the dump pouches, I think those get overlooked so much. J.A. Dudley, right? He's in media now, but old MMA fighter. Not old, but retired MMA fighter. He carries a dump pouch on his belt at all times, and it just holds his coffee mug. Like its sole purpose is to hold his coffee mug. I thought I carried a lot of stuff. That dude can fill a backpack by emptying his pockets. But so like I've talked to guys where it's like hey, okay, you get in this fight. What are you doing with your magazines? Oh, I'll just drop them and I'll come get them later. It's like, okay, first off, if you're sticking around during a fight, you've already lost.
Yeah.
Like when a fight starts, dude, if it's not my front door, I am getting out of there. I might be fighting my way out of there, but I am not sticking around. So to have a dump pouch and just throw your magazines in, or if it's a situation so you were talking earlier about like, cops show up, you're a guy in a plate carrier, they're already nervous, they don't know what's going on. My wife had pointed out to me one time, so I carry AKs. My SOP is if I'm driving more than an hour's drive away from the house, there's a rifle in the truck. And it was when all that, they had that New Orleans shooting and the Cybertruck thing going on, and there was like a legitimate fear of a bunch of terrorism kicking up. And my wife looks at me and is like, you understand if something happens and you're around, you're a bearded dude with a head covering and an AK? I was like, yeah, probably not good. I went and bought a bunch of American flag head wraps, which is what I normally wear, but they're all dirty right now. But
that was good thinking.
Right. But so something like a dump pouch on your belt line doesn't necessarily, and if it's not like a camo color, like all mine are either black or coyote tan, just because I enjoy solid colors, that doesn't scream tactical gear to me. Or like a small pouch on your belt doesn't scream tactical gear to me, like a plate carrier or like some of the old stuff I carry. So, perfect example. I repurpose gear. I like get it cheap, milsurp it in, and then work with what you got. One of the other ones I used to love, the old SKS bandoliers, like the Chi-Com.
Yep.
I think I actually have one over there somewhere. No, I don't see it. But they're made to hold 10-round 7.62 stripper clips. And each one's made to hold, however many it is. It holds 2 Glock mags perfect. And so, like, my wife carries a Kel-Tec Sub 2000. That's her truck gun. And so she's just got one of those just slapped full of loaded Glock mags. If you see someone with that on their chest, that's going to scream, this person has something. Versus you see a dude with a dump pouch on his waist, you probably wouldn't even notice it. And if you did, other than people who already know what it is, probably isn't going to understand what it is. It just doesn't seem as threatening, I guess is the word I'm looking for. But yeah.
Well, after being in the Great War on Terror for 20 some odd years,
yeah,
there's a lot of vet fashion items that I've seen come into mainstream. Everybody started to wear the paracord bracelets.
Yes.
Lots of people were turning their watch, so it was inside on their wrist. Grunt style shirts are worn by more than just grunts now.
Yeah.
So I think you can get away with a little bit of that depending on where you're at. I carry an AK for my vehicle gun too, and it stays in the vehicle. It doesn't matter if I'm an hour away or not. But I have a crappy old camp chair bag that I put in it. And it's not tactical. And the minute I got it, I took it up to my buddy's farm up in Georgia, and I was like, I'm going to throw this out on your deck. I want the chickens to crap on it. I want to walk around and put boot prints on this. And so it does not look like, what it is. And
play tight.
Well, I've got, four magazines of 7.62 hollow point, plus the one that's in the rifle. So when we were doing that vehicle class, we found out that with the AK controls being as big as they are, you can actually run the bolt from the outside. And so you don't have to take the camp chair gun out or the gun out of the camp chair bag. So if you're shooting that inside a vehicle, it's nice too because it collects all your brass in there. So little things to think about, we're talking about, when do you keep your mags versus when you throw them on the ground and stuff. I'm thinking all right, we're in an austere environment. I might need to go do something proactively at some point. And then when I leave, I don't want to be marked and have like shell casings all over the place, because if I go by a checkpoint,
Yeah.
like I don't want them to spot, oh, that smells fresh. What you
Yeah.
been doing, bud? You know, I like the idea of keeping all my unburned powder, or at least some of it, inside the bag as well. So, you know, it's not going to put forensics all over my car and make it easier to clean up after, and, you know, try to be a clean person.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's definitely use cases for stuff like that where I'm like, is it tactical? No. Is it military? No. But it makes sense to me.
It's MacGyver. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the last topic we'll go on is people versus gear. So, what have you guys seen from the way? How can I put this here? So, tactics that the guys were able to deploy in GWAT, okay, in Afghanistan and Iraq, okay, and they came back to the States. What are some of those that they were able to transition to the civilian population? And is it practical or is it novelty? You know, close quarters. Okay, those guys had to clear buildings all the time, and all kinds of situations. In a civilian world, okay, in the way we are right now, we don't need to have that, but it's fun to do. And if we're ever in a stir environment, like you were saying, then having those skills might be helpful to a certain extent. Because if you really follow a practical mindset, you're avoiding all that situation. I mean, unless you're going to get your people, why would you risk trying to clear a building unless it was like right next to your property and someone
Yeah.
moved in, they were doing something? So, yeah, it's fun to have that skill set, you know, to do when you're playing. Okay, Co's playing it, but the need for it is very limited. So I guess it's better to have it than not have it. But I think there's too much emphasis on the desire or the fantasy of having that skill set over other more practical skill sets. So, what are you guys' thoughts on that?
I would agree with you. So I've done a good bit of room clearing training, CQB training. A good friend of mine is former SWAT, and he was a SWAT door kicker, and his CQB course is you talk about an immersive course, you know, and things that I wouldn't think of that he would throw in as real world situations. He would do it a couple of ways. So it was an all day course. He would let you run through the house. Now you have not had a chance to walk through the house. You haven't seen the house, anything like that. And you get the option, run through first with either rifle or pistol, your choice. I wanted to go through with rifle just because I wanted to be the cool guy, right? And as soon as you throw that door open and you just go to lean a little forward, boom, somebody grabs your barrel and yanks you into the room. And now you're sprawled out looking up. There's 4 guys surrounding you with guns in your face. And you're like, oh, I messed up, you know, or you hit a corner too hard because you think there's a wall there and it's an open plan concept. And again, you're standing there with your mouth open and there's 3 guys pointing guns at you, you know. It was just little stuff like that if you're not trained in that, it's not necessarily an intuitive thing to think about. I had a point and I completely forgot. What was the question again?
Well, it's, you know, the general point was, okay, that set of skills, okay, CQB.
Yes.
Okay.
So with CQB, like you said, if I'm realistically, the only house I'm ever going to clear is my house. I come home and my front door is open, I'll clear my house. I'm not clearing anybody else's house. short of I am 100% confident that a loved one of mine is in there. It's not a necessity for me. So I think what we went through a lot in the Middle East, especially the last half of it, it almost seems to steal a video game term, farming for XP. I've heard one guy mention it, where it was just nonstop room clearing, just because we could. I can't remember the guy's name. He did the Vet TV stuff. Tim O'Malley. He talks about that a lot, and he was like, we're not fighting. Like he says he's got friends who are taking selfies as they like lobbed grenades behind their shoulders into windows and stuff, and it's like, yeah, distasteful, yes, but I mean, considering the situations, I think we can see a lot from what's going on in Ukraine now to translate over. Man, drones, that poor man's artillery, that is going to be a freaking game changer for our future warfare, in my opinion. And in the beginning, I had the idea, which I think a lot of people did, was to integrate a shotgun into that system. And after watching a couple interviews with Chris Cappy, formerly with Task and Purpose, he's now got his own channel, but he went over to Ukraine and did 2 missions with the guys, and he said the one thing you realize immediately is if you hear a drone, it's too late. By the time you hear it, it's about 50 yards away, and it can cover 50 yards in about 2 seconds. So if you hear it, just take off running, because like that's your only chance. Or get away from whatever vehicle you're close to, because for them it's a war of attrition at this point. They're not really caring about the individual soldier. They're just trying to destroy each other's equipment at this point. And drain the other one's pocket more. Yeah. Drones scare the hell out of me.
Yeah, I think they should. It's kind of going to your topic about room clearing. I think CQB and I think a lot of people get into it a little bit before it's time. So there's kind of a baseline that I like to see people establish. Let's deal with the most common scenarios first. Like if we're talking food, what's more likely? You're going to wake up tomorrow and EMP has hit, and you get to front row seat to a live play of 1 second after, or you lose your job next month and you've got savings, but you don't want to constantly be going to Publix to drain those even faster because you don't know when the next job's coming.
Yep.
So what do you do? Like that's, I think, addressing the most common stuff, because it's been a little bit difficult for some of specifically the veteran trainers that I know, to kind of take their experiences out of that context and then make them applicable to a civilian, right? Yeah. Like the military clears things, they clear rooms the way they do because they have freaking grenades. So like when they're throwing a couple, 1 or 2 frags in there that are pre-cooked, and they're following those in before hopefully the last chunks hit the ground, and they're coming right behind it. That's completely different than, hey, I've got to go, my kid sleeps in the other room, I've got to go make it to her, right? Like, or hey, we're taking all these people that are locals, and we formed a neighborhood watch, and there's looters, or there's people from the city that are calling themselves government, that are going to tell us how much of our resources, food, water, shelter, and security, we get to keep. And oh, by the way, they also want to talk to you about your guns first. Like the small unit tactics that you have to use at that point, like you need to make sure people are safe.
Yeah.
And that's one of the other things that with the military guys and trainers I've seen, like it's hard to be a part-time CQB ninja. just things like don't muzzle sweep somebody's elbow or ankle. Why? Because if you make a contact shot with a rifle or a shotgun or even a pistol on an elbow or an ankle, it's going to be really hard to rebuild. If
It's
you have the
gone.
best, yeah, I mean, well, I mean, you'll see little through and throughs. I had a buddy of mine who shot himself in the hand twice a couple of years ago because he forgot some of the rules of gun safety, and you know, that whole keep your booger hook off the bang switch and don't put the muzzle over anything that you don't want to destroy. He kind of forgot about those, and then always treat a weapon if it's loaded until you personally verified otherwise. You know, that's just little things like that that I've tried to beat into his head for years. But he had 2 touching holes right between his index and middle fingers.
Wow.
And he had his EDC loads in, so he carries the same thing I do, federal HSTs. But fortunately for him, there wasn't enough tissue to force expansion
Yeah.
of the hollow point, so he just had poke poke.
Oh.
And, yeah, but like little things like that, you know, I look at what is more viable is after you've gotten somebody up to a good baseline in a lot of those really important areas, so that they're not a drag on the group that they're part of, and they're not a danger to themselves or others. Um, you know, getting somebody to train you from like a special forces background, that's one of their big missions, is to go behind enemy lines and take people who are not soldiers and essentially open up a second front in a battle. You know, world's deadliest school teachers, they even get the cool headwear, but they like that's more applicable to the missions that I see, especially talking about prepping and self-reliance.
Mm-hmm.
Than, you know, guys doing bill drills or you know, like the El Presidente transfers, where you're transferring over from your rifle to your pistol, right? You get to drop it on your single point sling, and you know, you come up and you punch out your pistol. And I'm thinking like, all right, if my rifle stops working, I should be moving towards something, not just standing out here in the middle of this range and ingraining into myself the habit that I get to be uh, doing my gunfighting from not behind cover. You know, but would I rather take that second to draw that pistol or get behind cover and figure out why my rifle stopped working and then get my bigger caliber weapon back into the fight? You know,
Yeah. No.
little things like that. It's like, all right, dude, you have like 10 other things. You know, let's look at you doing controlled pairs, and then looking at a failure to stop, or what they used to call the Mozambique drill. You know, before we go and practice the El Presidente transfers on the range.
Yeah.
You know, let's look at you being able to tell me, you know, while drunk and sleep deprived, the 4 rules of gun safety as if they're written on your brain.
Yeah.
Before we worry about, okay, we're going to all stack up. Does everybody have the Chi-Com surplus gear on? You know, let's get ready to go into the shoot house. It's like, no, dude, when was the last medical class you took?
Well, the basics are really the most important things, but they're the things that are the most overlooked. You know, this is what, you know,
they're not sexy.
Right.
That's the problem with them.
Out of my years of doing all this stuff, okay, I've got to a point where I try to gear my focus with everything under the theme of scale from 0. So it's like the soft guys would do. They go into some place, they bring the teacher, like you mentioned, the villager, and teach them basic stuff. I think people that don't know anything, okay, are easier to scale up from 0 than guys that have some experience or they think they can shoot. Because all those lessons that they learned, right or wrong, they don't want to deviate from it. And it's ingrained. This is where it's like a lot of times it's easier to train women than men when it comes to firearm stuff because, you know, all these guys, they all think they know how to drive a car, you know, better than everybody else. They're able to shoot better than everybody else. And when they don't really practice, you know, defensive driving, you know, or really go and train with their firearm other than shooting some paper targets.
Yep.
You know?
Well, that's, to me, you start looking at those guys, and you know, when I'm evaluating a trainer, like there's little things like, okay, you're a teacher in this context. Who have you recently trained with? What's your continuing education? Are you keeping up with changes in society and culture, geopolitical events that might change a little bit of what we do, and what's viable training tactics. Um, for a lot of those people, like the amount of logistics that goes into the situations where they were doing violence was something that you almost take for granted, but you don't realize that for every guy that's a trigger puller, there's probably quite a few people that aren't, that are supporting him, making sure he gets paid, fed, watered, he has somewhere to wash his butt when he starts stinking,
It's like sure 9 logistics to every 1 soldier, if I recall correctly, in the Army.
That was what our ratio is, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but for that, to me, like, when I look at a lot of those people coming into this field, like, I hear some scary stuff, and you were talking about the guys that are difficult to train. Like, the top 3 things, I've been involved with formal, training classes that are firearm related for about, I guess, 15 years now, 14, 15 years, something like that. And it's like, oh, I'm good. My uncle, brother, cousin was a Jedi Ninja SEAL, and he taught me everything I need to know. And then you find out that uncle, brother, cousin is actually a truck driver. He was a truck driver in the military, and he just watches a lot of YouTube videos, and that's how he can help people learn. Or I grew up around guns,
but they shot a 22 once when they were 10 years old.
You'll get there's a term for guys that are of a certain age typically, and they have a mentality. They call them FUDs in the training community. After old Elmer Fudd, he was just a hunter. He didn't care about anything else, and But like when I talk with those FUDs, it's like, dude, you shoot your bolt action 30-06 5 times a year to zero it in, so that your wife will let you go up and sit in the tree stand up in Georgia and drink a case of beer a day and not bother you. And you don't give a crap whether you shoot, see anything at all. Just some peace and quiet, So those 2, and then the used to be's is the third one. I was in the Army. I know everything I need to know about that. I used to be a cop, and that's like, well, have you kept up with relevant training? What kind of training did you get while you were in? Like, do you know how people are setting up their plate carriers differently after 20 some odd years of lessons learned versus when they first started out and guys were literally duct taping crap onto their vests because it was field expedient? Like, things have advanced.
Just the sheer gear change from 2001, okay, until present day. I mean, those guys deployed, okay, to Afghanistan, outside of the soft guys, okay, they had stuff from the first Gulf War.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and everyone was modifying things. Brendan, wasn't he that told me it was like a guy from Afghanistan that did the RATS tourniquet?
Yeah. It was a guy come in, or I'm sorry, a local dude had come in with his 7-year-old daughter who had a mechanical amputation. He goes to throw his cat around her, and her arm is smaller than the diameter that the cat will allow. So he yanks his bootlaces off and ties her up with that. And then he developed the cat tourniquet from that. RATS tourniquet, I'm sorry. But, to touch on like the gear change, we started the GWAT. Tourniquets weren't even standard issue. Like we were giving our soldiers 2 triangle bandages, rather than actual tourniquets.
Yeah.
Well, I think it was 2006 before they even founded TCCC.
I believe so. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's the review board. That's all the clearinghouse for lessons learned for everybody.
I mean, I would think, this is anecdotal here, that the highest causes of injuries, let alone deaths, in GWAT had to be IEDs, okay, bleeding out from getting shot because they didn't have tourniquets and stuff like that. And then let's see, there was one more I had in my head here. Probably, CQB and clearing buildings. I mean, RPGs maybe.
I know that there was a lot of head trauma just because you're dealing with, Adobe style houses, essentially mud huts that got 2-foot thick walls, and all the overpressure from the rifles and grenades and stuff going on.
Okay.
So I know I've heard them called a bunch of different things, but the most common one I hear is like battle signs, where you get bruising behind the ears. It's essentially brain bleeds. So there'd be a guy, he'd be in a vehicle with an IED, and he seems fine. He's up, like adrenaline dumps working, and then next thing you know, an aneurysm blows, and he's seizing out on the ground. Something like that. So I know that was a huge problem. I couldn't tell
Went
you
from
the
super fine
numbers,
to
but-
super duper not fine.
Yeah.
exactly.
So we had our 20-ish years of, trial and error. It basically evolving to the space is what Ukraine and Russia are doing now.
Yep.
Okay. In their own set of ways, bringing back trench warfare, drones. There's a lot of emphasis on shelling because that is like Russian doctrine, but you really don't even hear about shelling anymore. Not to say they're not doing it, but it seems to be drones, mostly trench warfare, and then what you call it, landmines a little bit. But they just mine everything, and everyone just goes away. There's probably more people getting hurt by trying to clear mines, because they know they're there versus walking into a minefield not knowing it's there.
Well, a lot of times they're dispensing the mines through artillery.
Yeah.
So you can have a high burst shell. That means you don't have a very accurate map of the minefield.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like Russia's pretty famous for that one.
Those little butterfly mines.
Yeah, little toe poppers just absolutely ruin your freaking day. Like the lessons learned out of this stuff, because that's the thing that to me, like studying this field of study for a while, I'm like looking at all the people that were watching us in Iraq and Afghanistan. The whole world was watching.
Mm-hmm.
So now tactics and techniques and procedures are evolving on the good guy's side, but also on the bad guy's side. When they had that mass shooting in Belgium a few years ago, one of the most interesting things about that was that was the first time I had seen on an active shooter team med gear. Right, so you saw tourniquets, and they were good ones, like cats and soft T wides and everything. I mean, it wasn't necessarily the level of gear that they were standardized, but I mean, they had an exfil plan.
Yeah.
So it's not just we're going to go in here and shoot this up, and then inshallah I'll be in paradise in 30 minutes or less. It's no, we want to get everybody out. We want to make sure everybody's combat effective. That means that you have a logistics network, that somebody's probably running safe houses for you, and you have a place for your little insurgents to hide and recover and everything, and then you're going to do it again.
There's a practicality to that because several points too. One is it's probably easier to get guys to do that than guys that just sacrifice themselves because they're believing the whole 70 virgins deal. But then also all the investment you're making in training these guys, the more events you can procure out of them, the better value, especially if it's harder to get guys to do this. And to get guys to do this stuff, they got to have some kind of sense in their head that they can be taught. What was that?
I hope I don't lose all my piece.
This is a good way for us to segue. I'll edit that little portion out.
Okay.
We'll transition into the next segment. Aaron's going to take the lead here. We're going to focus on 4 areas of preparedness that can be utilized across the board in pretty much any kind of emergency situation. whether it's a hurricane or a blackout in Western Europe. The pillars will be water, food, security, and shelter. All right. So, all right, Aaron, why don't you take it away?
All right. So I kind of came up with this, I mean, it's loosely based on Maslow's hierarchy and what's down there at the bottom of it. I noticed after a few years in prepping that everybody kind of had their own pet apocalypse, and everybody was training for slightly different things and preparing for slightly different things. But regardless of what you were concerned about, it seemed like the ways that you had to deal with it were all very similar.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go in, you realize that every human needs those four things to be able to get higher and higher up, and stop just surviving, thriving, and everything. But if you're missing one of those pillars on the base, like, you're screwed.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I did was working with a few people over the years, kind of develop some metrics for how those people should address those four things. And this is the kind of basic stuff that I look at for people who are just coming in, or who I don't know. We'll do like not an audit, but very similar to one where we look at, okay, what's your realistic situation right now?
A baseline.
And then, yeah, if there's deficiencies, let's address it. So those four areas cover so much crap. And so I've had to break it down into really small increments. So, like, I would tell people, in Florida, we have a unique relationship with water. Finding it's not hard, typically. Making it potable is, because we have basically a jungle environment. So every icky, nasty, gross lives in our water system. And like anybody who drinks unfiltered Florida swamp water, after they get out of the hospital, will tell you that was probably a terrible friggin' idea. And then you also add in stuff like a lot of the industrial fertilizer and heavy metals that are washed off into the groundwater in some areas.
Mm-hmm.
So getting a filtration system set up, and then keeping a certain amount of water on hand, and then having containers to store more of that water. Like, in my family, one of the things that we do when we know a hurricane's coming in, we take a water bob and fill it up in the bathtub.
Yeah.
That gives us, however many gallons of gray water that we can use. So, we like bathing ourselves. We like being able to cook food, so, and sometimes that's a little bit rough if you don't have access to any water. But then we look at drinking water, and I base that on a consumption of about 1 gallon of drinking water per day, which most people don't drink a gallon of water per day. When I've been working out and some of my supplements, I'll almost drink 2 gallons.
Wow.
But that 1 gallon of drinking water per day leaves you a little bit of room for error, so you build yourself a little bit of margin for error and insurance policy. So, then getting people to have, like, they just had a sale on the life straws.
Mm-hmm.
4-pack to less than $30. That's way more accessible, especially if you set it up with one of the bags that the company makes, where you can put the 2 liter in
The gravity bags, yeah.
stick it on there, and you can have fresh water. So every one of my family members has a certain amount of life straws that are assigned to them. Dad keeps them in the office, but that's kind of our basis. And then usually, I've been able to get by when I was, living in austere environments and in other countries on less than a gallon of non-drinking water per day. Between cooking and showering and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
I have a wife and a daughter, and hopefully I won't be called a male chauvinist pig for this and be toxically masculine, but generally women seem to use a little bit more water per day. So
Yeah.
we typically go for about 2.5 to 3 gallons of non-drinking water per person per day. Um, and that's just kind of our baseline on
Yeah.
in that category. Then as you continue to work and you've been in longer and you've been able to save your pennies and stuff. To me, that's when you start looking at the Berkeley water filters or
Mhm.
building a water filtration system, for yourself. One of the earliest ones we were doing was 2 5-gallon buckets, and then building a 3-stage filter
Yeah.
with gravel and sand, and then we used the activated carbon
Mhm.
charcoal bricks that they use for fish tanks.
Ah,
And so that actually gets out. You don't have to bleach it, your water or anything like that. You can shock it if you want. Um, but that usually gets out like the heavy metals and stuff that don't respond to bleach. Um, and then also we started keeping a pool shock without the algicide or fungicide.
mhm.
So it's just regular. I think it's either sodium calcium hydrochloride or calcium hydrochloride. I might have those two mixed up, but one of the things that I found, like going over into when I was traveling on mission trips in Mexico and Belize, the shelf life of bleach is not forever.
Right.
So after about 6 months, it's lost most of what makes it good to have. But that pool shock can be in a little mylar pouch, and it has a longer shelf life than I do. So being able to mix that up and make a certain amount of bleach per batch, or even having double concentrate bleach.
A
If
fun
you
fact: you can actually make your own bleach.
Yeah, that's what we were using the pool shock for.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
Just
salt
mix it in the
water and
water.
electrolysis. You can make it
Yeah,
with salt water and electrolysis.
yeah, I haven't gotten that into it. I've got so much crap at this point, but
Well, the
just
gear.
having that.
Yeah. Well, the gear evolution with water has been very interesting in my time of preparedness. So, one of the first water-related pieces of gear that I ever bought was the water bob. I bought two of them, and at the time they were like $20 a piece, 100 gallons each, and never had to crack them open. And when COVID came around, they were just crazy prices on Amazon, and then they were selling just the ones for 80 gallons, not 100. So shrinkflation had creeped in, and then shortages creeped in and just impacted it.
Yep.
And then with water filters, um, I the Life Straw was the first one that I ever saw, but I never purchased. It was like on my to get list.
Hmm.
And then when it got down to when I was going to go hiking, that's when I had to pull the trigger to get one. And I'd watched so many hiking and backpacking videos, and the Sawyer Mini was the go-to. Um, they do a very similar job, but one of the big selling points for me on the Sawyer Mini was the fact that it was able to screw in, okay, on a 16-ounce water bottle, or it was certain bottles that I had at the time.
Hmm.
So those 2 points, I jumped on that. And as all this gear evolved, those were two of the main competitors. There was a third water filtration kit that was very popular. And my buddy that hiked the Colorado Trail, he took it with him. Um, and the Be Free, I think it's Catadine Be Free.
Hmm.
So I've used that out in the field. And the first time I went backpacking, I was actually double filtering it. I was using the Catadine Be Free, and then I was using the Sawyer Minnow on top of that, just because I hadn't done it before. And I was like, oh man, I don't want to, get diarrhea out here in the middle of the wild and what have you. But it was interesting to learn all those different things. And then Southern Prepper One, you guys are all familiar with him.
Hmm.
Last year or so, maybe 2 years, he started getting some merch. he partnered with some guy and was doing like emergency Mylar sleeping bags and tents and water filters. You can get like a 5-pack for the price of like one Life Straw or two.
So I just took his out, that little 3-day adventure I did with my nephews and my son, and I bought a 5-pack and passed them around to the guys, and we were drinking straight out of the river. The one thing I like about his is his does have the threaded cap to it. So,
Okay.
so we were filling water bottles, squeezing them into our canteen cups because we're all coffee drinkers. So we were kind of double filtering it ourselves too. But it's cool that you can fill a water bottle up from the river that's, it's green or brownish because all the tannins, squeeze it through the filter, and it's coming out crystal clear, tastes fine. And then we were boiling it too just to make coffee. But
I've bought some of his stuff. I didn't buy his water filters, but I have that on. Like, if I'm going to do something charitable, because I like him. I don't watch his content as much as I used to, but I feel like I've watched him enough that he's not going to sell us a piece of crap of equipment. So sometimes, we got to help people out if we're going to buy gear. And we spend so much money on gear. A lot of it we don't even use that much or as often. Why not throw this guy 15, 20 bucks, buy his filters? You can never, especially, and let me put this in a way. I'm the kind of guy, and so are you, Brendan, and hope you are too, Aaron, where we help people out with gear. Okay? Sometimes it's like we outgrow the gear or we evolve to something else and we give it away. We've given stuff out. I try to encourage people to do that. Now, some people, they just have the very minimal amount of gear. Obviously, they're not going to do that. But, we play with so much stuff for so long. It's just like, give it. It's like a starter kit for somebody, So whenever we give back, whatever way, and I try to encourage that kind of stuff.
Well, having those little aid packs is nice to be able to have, and just in the hurricane stuff.
Oh yeah.
I remember giving some people that have been without power deodorant and baby wipes, and a few other things, some water, and I knew the husband had just bought his first Smith & Wesson M&P AR-15, so but I knew he had like one magazine for it. So I ran him a couple of magazines of PMC X-Tac. The only one that probably hurt me to give away was the ammo. It caused me a little stress, but then he came back after it was all over, and he's like, "Dude, thank you so much." Like, and he hit me back with my ammo, so that was nice. My magazines.
Yeah. So, well, I'm a big Magpul guy when it comes to magazines for the most part. Sometimes the gear. But there's so many times that I've bought ammo where they're like, hey, you get 10 free mags. I mean, I have so many magazines, I can't ever use them all, but whenever I get like, the steel or, the cheapy ones they give you, or people give me magazines, I keep it all. And then when I can give it to somebody, I give it to them,
Yeah.
But it's all part of that evolution. And Berkey is probably the goat of water filtration when it comes to popularity and people purchasing it. I know they're having issues recently, and they got some lawsuits and everything. But for a long time, Berkey was it. I mean, when people were doing those Home Depot bucket ones, they were buying the Berkey filters. Brendan, you made some of those buckets, right? Yeah.
Yep. And now, that being said, I like Berkey. I stand by Berkey. There's a channel on YouTube called Project Farm. This dude, just older retired dude, he'll buy a dozen different products and then pit them against themselves in 10 different categories or whatever. And he did one with water filters, and you'd be surprised. I believe it was Aquamira. was the one that came out like above and beyond all of them.
Oh, wow.
Berkey, I think, was like third or fourth.
Oh, man.
But yeah, no, I like Berkey.
Yeah, a lot of the water filtration stuff, a lot of it's marketing, because you got, people with low-level knowledge of what's what, and they're like, oh, it gets out 98% or 99.7%. Well, it's that 0.03%, okay, amoeba that's going to kill me, okay? So unless you're getting that, your filter is no good to me. But, I just couldn't make the Berkey purchase work, when I was getting my stuff. And I ended up going with, I think at the time it was like Berkey was number one. Catadine was probably number 2 or 3 with Alexa Pure. And that's like the one that's like all over the place now. You can get that on Patriot Supply. And I think it started off with Alex Jones was hacking that or hawking that. And I got extra filters and stuff like that. But to this day, I've not broke that out because I water filter from my fridge. But if I'm ever at a point, and I keep a lot of bottled water that we drink, we don't really drink a lot from the cooked water from the faucet. We'll get water from the fridge with that filter, and then I'll brush my teeth and I'll rinse my mouth out with the faucet water. I'm not afraid of it, but it's such a small amount of that water that I consume that is not bottled, But I have enough water filters to go with my kit, okay, that, we'd be able to produce a good amount of water, Some people, have one they actively use in their house, which is great. And my environment is just not one of those things, and I think one of the big proponents for people not using, say, a water filter or a certain appliance is counter space. If they don't have something that they can keep laid out, set up, they're just going to put it away. They're never going to use it. Like, oh, I don't want to pull it out of the box and do this. And with the water filter, you got to keep using it. Otherwise, it's just going to dry out and you're not going to be able to use it. So, and how many people, okay, are going to take the time to actually clean the filter to get, to have it be effectively used and get longevity out of it,
Well, the ones that want to have their expensive purchase actually last for a while.
Right. But a lot of people that buy those expensive purchases, they don't dig that deep. They're falling for the marketing, and that's it. A little pool shock story. I bought the clean pool shock, the one that doesn't have all the added. It's just the pure chemical compound. And I bought one pouch because I was going to buy a whole bunch. Let me try one pouch. And I saw some videos about you need to store this a certain way, otherwise it's going to vent in your house. And I'm like, well, I don't want to put it in my garage, because because you got to keep it in a cool, dark place. Well, a garage in Florida is like a big oven.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it probably gets up to 150 degrees in there.
Our whole state's an oven.
Yeah. So, and I don't really have any outside storage that's out of the elements to really, take the chance. So I kept it in my house, and one day I was smelling the chlorine. I'm like, crap, man. And so I could start seeing it was coming out of the plastic bag. So then I put it in a mason jar because I saw a video for that. And then I had it in my laundry room, which has heat. So it just got exponentially more. And then my dad saw it one day and just threw it in the trash. So it was like that experiment totally failed. So I haven't repurchased anymore. But I know that's the product that I'd want to go with because, you have so many uses for it. Doesn't have the extra chemicals. But it may just have to be one of those, okay, the apocalypse is about here. Amazon, click go.
Yep.
Next day delivery.
I mean, we all hope we get that forewarning, right?
Yeah. I'll have that emergency purchase list ready to go. Add to cart, go.
That was one of the.
I live near an Amazon distribution hub.
Yeah.
So that's I make that joke because some of my stuff comes like in 4 hours if if it's in stock,
Yeah,
So
that's super convenient. I'm not too far away from one, but it's definitely. I think the buy it now button is probably the most brilliant invention from their side, and it's probably the one that's hurt my wallet the most
yeah.
over the years. I'll be sitting out on my front porch having a couple of cocktails, and then Amazon boxes start arriving. I was like, oh, it's almost like being Santa Claus for myself. I have no idea what's in here.
Well, retailers have been the best at reducing and removing the amount of friction of making a purchase.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If there's a hoop, if they could take 10 seconds out of it, any kind of inconvenience, they find a way to do it.
Oh, yeah.
But, to touch on a point you brought up earlier is that there's no shortage of water. Okay. And it's the bodies of water. Okay. So one of the challenges for people who live in suburbia like myself, you live in HOA communities, there's water all over the place. Okay. And there's fish in that water. And there's kids are always fishing in there. People are complaining on next door. Oh my God, they're fishing it. It's okay. They can fish. Why do you care? Okay. you want to eat that fish, that frankenfish in that toxic cesspool?
I think they have like 3 eyes.
Yeah.
Freaking horn on it somewhere.
But, a thing that is a challenge, like I know, like I'll stack X amount of water and I got filtration, but I don't know if my filtration is going to be able to, I don't plan on getting water out of those retention ponds. But I know neighbors that don't have anything, don't know any better, they're going to go and try to get water out of those things.
Yep.
And, that's going to hurt a lot of people, And some people would say, well, why do you care? It sucks to be them. Well, you got to sit there in these high density areas. It's different for guys that live out in the more rural areas and you have acres and there's less density of people. Okay. Mm-hmm. But when you live in the suburban area or the urban area where there's a lot of density, and you got to be mindful of what's going on because you're going to have to deal with those people. Criminals will sit there and do things in their own neighborhoods first before they go somewhere else. So people are going to act crazy in their own neighborhoods, okay, before they go somewhere else. So you were going to say something on that?
Yeah, I'm kind of being more on the training side of stuff. That's one of the interesting things to me is that criminals tend to be pretty good at setting up ambushes, and they're pretty good at picking targets to set up ambushes on. So one of the things I've noticed is during disasters, they're just like any other hunter, right? Where do you go find animals to shoot and kill, right? Yeah. You get them when they have to water or eat, right? Or, if it's a deer, you get him when he's being a buck. It's in the rut. But, for a lot of those guys, you see that if you don't have some way to transport that water, imagine if like a retention pond is part of your big water strategy. Mm-hmm. How many trips do you want to make out there? If you've got a 1 gallon bucket, do you have the physical fitness necessary to carry this 1 gallon bucket? If we did 2 gallons per day per person for gray water, 1 gallon drinking water per person, all right, that's 15 times, right, that you're having to make a trip. And every trip you're exposing yourself.
Oh, yeah.
It's usually probably not going to be on the first one that you get hit. It's going to be like number 15 when you're nice and tired, or they'll watch you for a couple of days and be like, oh, hey, he's going for a family of 3. And he always comes over at 9 o'clock in the morning because he likes getting here before the heat does, Yeah. It's like clockwork. He's super scheduled.
Wasn't it Sniper Alley during the Yugoslavian Civil War was literally like a natural spring that people were going to get water from. And a dude just set up 100 yards down. And every time someone would come into that open alleyway to get spring water, he'd just
boom. Strike fear, cause chaos. And to what end? Either you're a psycho just trying to torment people or you're trying to drive people out of that area. Outside of that, why would you even do that, to civilians anyways? You know?
Well, I mean, if we're looking at a grid down scenario, if somebody sees me grabbing 15 gallons of water and he only sees me coming out to do it, then he knows there's other people at my house, but I'm not at my house.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
So
yeah.
I'm still a fairly fit military age male. He might be wondering, hey, like if I cap dad over there, like what's, I know that daughter's only 3, but he's got a wife in there somewhere, and I've got different tasks for her to do that she may be unfamiliar with, in this area, so that's, we were talking earlier when we were talking about what to go over on this show, and I see a lot of overlap between all 4 of those pillars.
Yeah.
The food stuff. A lot of people stock rice and beans.
Mm-hmm.
That's like the beginnings of food prep. Well, how much water do you need to be able to boil that rice?
You need
Right?
2
And
cups
those
per
beans.
cup. 2 cups
Yeah.
water, 1 cup of dry rice.
Yep. And then how much per person per day are you going through? Are your beans old? Do you have to mill them to even be able to make a porridge out of it? After about 7 or 8 years, pinto beans are rock hard.
Yeah, you got to
with black beans.
Yeah.
Same with black beans.
I got food poisoning on black beans at one point. I was eating a little hole in the wall Cuban place up here in Tampa, and haven't been able to stand one since. But yeah, I mean that's little things where you see overlap in there, and then you go into the food side. Kind of just moving on with the topics, and to me, so the most likely thing that you're going to deal with in Florida is a hurricane.
Mm-hmm.
If you've been here less than a year, you probably haven't seen one. If you've been here over 5 years, you've probably seen 10. Because we'll just have some of those seasons are nothing, and that's when everybody moves down from up north. Because
Mm-hmm.
Florida's a great place to live if you're a snowbird. And then sometimes we'll have what I think it was 2005 or 6 or something. We had it seemed like a hurricane a month that was fairly serious. They just came right back to back to back to back. I didn't have to go to school for most of a month. It was great. But that so for the food, one of the things that I've seen where people start building their food storage plan is a lot of times they'll go to the Mormons, and the Mormons actually have it's part of their religion that you're supposed to have a certain amount of food for each member of your household. And,
Used to be
ones
1 year.
Yeah. Well, and the ones that are fairly serious about it, they even take it they don't have a kid before they have a year's worth of stuff stocked for the kid.
Oh,
So
wow.
before that, the kid's even coming in, they've got diapers and everything. And every area that has a decent concentration of Mormons will typically have a bishoprics cannery that you can go.
There's
and
a cannery in Plant City.
Yep. Been there a couple of times, but you can set up your own stuff in your number 10 cans over there. But one of the things I noticed when we started digging down into the Mormon diet and what they put for food stuff out, originally they were only doing 800 calories for a female and 1,200 calories for a male per day.
Wow.
And then that went up to 12 and 1,400, I think it was. And then I think the last I heard they'd gone up to 1,800. But I don't know about you guys. My gut's not McDonald's, so I've had 1,200 calorie bites of food.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine.
A quarter pounder with cheese meal.
Yeah. So I do my numbers off of the U.S. Army says 3,200 calories for a military-age male to under strenuous activity to not lose muscle mass. So I do my numbers off 3,200 calories a day. To touch on what you just said about they're just now getting to 1,800. A friend of ours, Van, has worked in the medical industry for quite a long time, and he does 1,800 because I guess that's what they give coma patients to keep them alive.
No.
So if 1,800 is to keep you vegetative, I would want definitely more than 1,800.
Yeah. Well, another thing that we discussed previously, I go back and I'm a big history buff. I'm a father over 30, so you either start wearing your Asics and New Balance shoes and start making your whole personality about smoking meat or World War II history or whatever. But I like reading a lot of the accounts of people that went out west in the Oregon Trail, and one of the things I noticed with them was food management was always a huge issue for those expeditions. And if they didn't have a good camp cook, I mean, they talk about it in the Yellowstone spinoff, 1863 or whatever it is.
1883.
1883, yeah. If they didn't have a good cook, like the expedition was pretty much considered to be doomed because he's actually rationing stuff. So I do a little bit more than that 3,200 calories. So I usually go between 3,500 and 4,000. That gives me a margin of error for spoilage. And also it builds in a little bit of a cushion. Like I've got some in-laws that are becoming more aware of this subject of study, but they don't have a lot of the same priorities that I do. So they like trips and vacations and everything, and I like multiple cases of 5.56 in the house. Like we have different spending priorities, but I don't want to be in the position of having to turn down, my child's grandparents if they show up at my door and be like, "Oh, yep, guys, I only did 1,800 calories. That's just enough to keep us just over starvation, not dying. So I'm afraid it sucks to be you right now, but they get on down the road." And that's, even just having stuff like rats getting in your food or other pests, we've got.
Or you get 4 foot of flood water from a hurricane and it floods 3 of your 55-gallon drums of rice, beans, and corn.
Yeah. Well, even how that stuff's packaging, like the 7 mil thick Mylar, that's going, back earlier, the pool shock, that's what I store the pool shock in, is the Mylar, because they use that for helium balloons because helium is smaller than an oxygen molecule. But if you just have the pool shock next to anything metal, and it's not properly packaged, it emits corrosive vapors. So over like the Mylar, it's not a problem to just reseal the bag if you need to burp it at some point.
So it's funny that you say that. I had several 55-gallon drums spread throughout the property, and some of them were Mylar bagged with DE and oxygen absorbers, and some of them were double-layered contractor bags with DE and then just goosenecked and zip tied. Those I had done earlier on in our food storage journey. All the ones in trash bags got contaminated. All of the ones in Mylar are still 100% fine. No leakage, anything like that.
Yeah, with the food storage protocol, so I think it was the University of Utah actually did a study on food storage and life cycle and stuff, and they found that oxygen absorbers were way more beneficial than moisture absorbers over time. So they have for their study that they did, they actually would put things under multiple atmospheres to to simulate time passing, and they found out that like with the right oxygen absorbers and Mylar bags, it basically has an indefinite shelf life.
Wow.
And you can also you can use them because they are non-permeable and they're smaller than an oxygen, oxygen molecule. If you wipe your Mylar bags down before you put them up with an alcohol-based wipe, you can also get around scent issues. So that's one of the things for caching stuff that, how do you cache, your rainy day backup plans? It's one of the protocols I've used, just 500 cc's per gallon of oxygen absorbers for the bags. That double layer seal, it makes such a huge difference.
Yeah.
So
well,
those, go ahead.
It's amazing to me what rodents can chew through. So we got different layers of protection. You got the bag to protect the food. alcohol wipe to get the scent to keep the the rodents away, and then say a 5 gallon bucket, to keep it all out from the elements. But if the rats can chew through that, do they even
That's
need?
why I like metal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we store the big orange screw top 55-gallon drums. They're
Mhm.
probably double, if not triple, the thickness of a 5-gallon bucket. And that's what we store all our animal feed in. And what I was doing is I would keep 6 months of animal feed, and I would just get to the bottom of one and rotate to the next one.
Mhm.
That way it was always in rotation. So we never treated it with anything other than maybe some diatomaceous earth every now and again.
Yeah.
But yeah, if the rats find that, they have no problem chewing a hole through that thing. And that plastics, if it's not an eighth of an inch, it's close.
Yeah. So the one of the things that I learned when I was doing research on the Berman stuff, because I nerded out and tried to learn as much as possible about storage protocols and stuff. Um, so rats and most other rodent members of the rodent family actually have constantly growing front teeth.
Mhm.
So they grow throughout their entire life. So chewing actually becomes something compulsive for them. If they're not chewing enough, they'll actually have the front teeth will grow, and
Yep.
it can grow actually up and end up killing the creature. Um, but they've been known to chew through dry cell concrete blocks. Um, so, and they just sit there, and there's something in there that they want, something that they're smelling, because they have a great sense of for water and food. Um, so one of the scenarios that I've looked at, and it's why I went to some of the metal 55-gallon drums. Um, if you're looking at spoilage on that, you know, one of my concerns was, let's say that somebody gets close enough to my house to wing a few rounds over there. Maybe it's somebody that just doesn't like the fact that my family doesn't look like we're concentration camp victims in a crisis. If rounds go through and they start poking holes in all of my carefully packaged stuff, because
Oh
nobody,
yeah.
that 5.56 round doesn't care where it's going, or
Mhm.
Grandpa got his old pump action shotgun out and put a 3 ounce slug through my garage door, you know, just because he's pissed or because he thought he saw something. Like that's an area, or why I kind of advocated like a decentralized food storage once you reach a certain point. The
Yeah.
first level I try to get everybody to is 30 days. So after 30 days of all of this stuff, and you should be able to go out, shut off your main breaker in your house, and make it for 30 days. And then we worked. Um, I go to restaurant supply stores to buy a lot of my bulk stuff. There's a local one called Restaurant Depot, and you only have to have a business license to get in, but membership's free.
Hmm.
Uh, so I typically save about between 30 and 50% on most of the proteins and stuff that I buy there, but it's also a good place to get bulk orders of grains. And it's not like going to Costco where if you pick up 600 pounds of rice, the cashier might look at you a little funny. Everybody in there is in a bulk restaurant environment. So having a pallet full of rice is not uncommon. So just some thoughts on, gearing that up, because, I know a lot of preppers that were very devout Costco followers for a long time. And
Yeah.
they're like, yeah, I go every month and buy stuff for my preps, and I buy a little bit at a time. And I always see the same cashier. We've struck up a conversation over time. I was like, so now you develop a relationship with this person, and she's going to remember you. And I
Mhm.
wonder if her kids get hungry, if she's going to think about the guy that bought 100 pounds of rice a month for a year, that she saw him like clockwork there. Oh, do you have your address on your membership? Huh.
Oh yeah.
So that brings me over to the shelter side of stuff, and like, I look at the personal shelters, being able to go mobile and get out and go into the field. For me, that's just like, talk about stuff you give away. I used to give away a lot of those Mylar blankets,
Hmm.
those space blankets. There are so many freaking uses for those.
Oh yeah.
Like making, everything from solar ovens to solar stills, wrapping up the bottom of a bush and, hooking the tail down in there so that you can get pure water that way. Um, like that's probably that and a good tarp and 550 cord. Like, you can get pretty comfortable. In Florida, I also typically live and die by mosquito netting. Um, and a lot of my relatives are fairly hippie-ish, but like I use freaking mosquito stuff with DEET in it because I don't like pulling ticks off of locations I won't bore you with, but some of them required assistance to find the tick. But that's kind of the basics of shelter. And then I talked with people a lot when we were first getting into the group about hardening their home. So it can be something as small as go onto your door frame and replace the screws that are holding your your door strike plate in
Door
there.
jam. Yeah.
Your door, the screws that are in the door jam for your lock with 3-inch screws that go all the way through. There's a lot of times they're just 1.5 or 1.25 screws, and you can boot those. The shear weight on them is jack crap. Also understanding stuff like wedges and having a plan for fires. That's one of the things I think a lot of people don't pay enough attention to. So if you have a bunch of idiots that are going to be cooking in however they can in a grid down scenario, and here in Florida it's windy. How far can a spark travel?
Yeah.
I used to do security at a Section 8 housing complex over in the east end of an absolutely stellar area of Tampa called Suitcase City. And one of the things that I always ended up having to gripe with the residents about was they would set up their grills in the breezeways of the apartments, especially during football season.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, this is your house. You know that paint's flammable, right? And you know that these are Section 8 apartments. You think the fire barrier is all up to code, or you think somebody did the old Tampa shuffle and passed an envelope to a building inspector before before they got the certificate of occupancy? How much do you want to bet on that?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
you were mentioning earlier about how grandpa with a shotgun could shoot into your garage. I mean, for me, I keep extra propane tanks. At one point, I was keeping a little bit of gas. I mean, most people that has a gas lawnmower keeps a little bit of gas in their garage. I think when the Colonial Pipeline went down, I didn't understand how our gas was distributed to Florida. I didn't know we were getting on barges and stuff like that. So I'm thinking, man, I went and filled up all my gas tanks, all my 5-gallon jugs, and it didn't impact us. So then it's like, oh man, it was a pain in the butt trying to get this gas to go back into my, dump it into my truck. So then I went and bought these little kits so I can convert my cans for better airflow. So that's a project for another video.
So
but
I'll send you the link for it. They make a NATO grade gas can, 5-gallon can, and it's vapor free. And one of the things that I've done with that is metal, and they're super durable, and they're a little over $100 a piece. I mean, they're pretty proud of their freaking gas cans. But one of the things I work with people, you get a generator, this is part of your shelter setup. It's also part of morale boosting and comfort and everything like that for people being able to take a hot shower or run an AC unit in one room of the house and have that be your cold room. I don't know about you guys, but my wife is not a fan of being hot and sticky. So if I can keep her from having to deal with that, that is going to up my quality of life hugely. And if I'm already stressed and a crappy time in my life, I don't want to add having a stressed out wife on top of that. But one of the things I work with is I've had people just buy one of those cans per month and put the stabilizer in there, and then you name them after that month. And when you come up on a year, you pour it in your gas tank and then refill it. And that way, you build up. After a year of that, you got 60 gallons of gas on site.
Yeah, it's a good rotation.
Yeah.
Well, for me, I got annoyed with the rotation. That's why I got those kits. But it really, the biggest thing for me was what happens if the house catches on fire for whatever reason. Between the propane tanks, having gas in the garage, or whatever. And I live in a 2-story house, and there's only one way to get up to the second floor in my house, like most houses. So when I first moved in here, I purchased these expandable ladders that you can just open up your window. I have 2 of them. One is none, 2 is one.
Yeah.
And my kids know we have them, and they know if this is how we're getting out. And you'll have some sides of my house where there's no leverage down.
Yeah.
Where the front of the house is above the garage, but that's where all the fuel is. But
I always recommended having those in a specific room, with like every room that's occupied for sleeping in, because if your kids know that you have it, but for some reason they can't get to you during a fire, right? Or it's better for them, to just leave the house if somebody's coming in the bottom, and it's better for them to just scamper while you deal with people there.
Yeah, and that was the next point I was going to bring up.
Yeah, those rope ladders are not that expensive. I mean, you can buy one to stage one in every room of the house, just about.
Yeah. Well, mine are metal, actually.
Yeah.
So it's hoping I'll never have to use those things.
Yeah. I like the dangling ladders because then you can just push them out and they don't take up that much space. That seems to be, a little bit easier than what I've seen. I've even seen some people build like a little box in front of the window, and they actually have the rope ladders on permanent attachments. They're already screwed into the studs, because you don't want your freaking out kid to have to figure out where a stud is so they can anchor the ladder. Or, I can put this ladder around this chair. That'll anchor it. You weigh more than the chair, bud. That's good thought, but we're not there yet, So that way you can just pre-stage it and just flip it up and go.
When my kids were little, we used to practice. Okay, if we got to go down, now I got 3 daughters. Okay, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna hold, you're gonna hold me on each side, and my oldest is gonna like hold around my neck. It probably never would have worked. I started pre-cutting rope, okay, to kind of make a harness, sort of just rough, so I could try to just like get down. And if I at least got low enough, I can drop them. What's gonna happen? They're gonna break a leg. That's better than burning alive.
Well, yeah, I mean, however long that's going to take you to get that harness set up and put it on and then grab them all. I mean,
I'm literally talking about like a hoop.
Yeah.
And sticking it under their arms and grab your waist.
Yep.
When they're panicking, who knows?
Yeah, for me that was always, I looked at those the rope ladders that are the light ones.
Yeah.
You could have a 4 to 5 year old pick that up and toss it down, and like, I don't know about you, my daughter loves to climb, especially the things that we don't want her to climb on. That's the things that are her favorite to climb on. But she's really cute, so I think I'll keep her. But it's definitely something that you can manage at a pretty young age to deal with. Like I said, they're cheap, so it's a cheap insurance policy. But so that's for shelter, and just kind of working through and having those little protocols that you're doing. Like, for one of the things that we did for hardening shelter and does with security is having people put up security cameras inside their house, and they can check it on their phone. So we talked earlier about how single person room clearing is a little bit difficult as a civilian, especially if that's not what you practice on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So wouldn't it be nice if you hear that bump in the night, and rather than having to come out in all your glory and find out what it is, if you could just check on your phone and then behave accordingly.
Yeah.
We have the rule. Everybody's in our bedroom. We co-sleep with my daughter, and the people are the only valuable thing in this house.
Yeah.
You can have the rest of it, right? Like, I'm gonna be pissed if my computer's gone. I'll use that for my gaming and stuff, but like, I can buy another computer.
Yeah.
But the rule is, you touch that door handle to our bedroom, and like, I'm gonna send you ahead of me to Valhalla to let them know I'm coming.
Yeah.
That's
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I think a lot of people don't go through that process to try to, come up with an inexpensive solution like that to give you a little extra security there. And one of the things I played with when I moved in, let's see, when I moved in here, I think that's when before I moved into my house now, I was in an apartment and I got a gun safe. And I just went back and forth. Where do I place this? And once I moved in here, I had a lot more rooms to deal with. Okay. And then part of the reason I took Krav Maga, when I did, is because I had to balance my risk, because my kids were so little. I wasn't going to risk having a gun out and about while my kids were all running all over the house. Now, a lot of gun guys are like, they don't like that. But for me, it's about risk management. So I'm like, what can I do? Okay. I need to be able to, get my kids and get to the guns. Okay. Because that was my risk management there and stuff. And I used to practice with the kids, and if I'm not going to have the gun accessible right there, then I need something. So I'd have, my skills were Krav Maga when, I had some, haven't done it in a long time. I'd have other blunt instruments around.
Yeah.
And then you just practice with your children, and you'll get them, and you get back to where, your stuff is, and then you can get it out. Everyone has to have a different plan, but it's too easy to sit there and just say, I need to have a loaded weapon on there, and just kids know not to touch it. They're children, I mean, you can sit there and explain it to them, but then that one day they don't listen.
Yep.
And then boom.
We have a saying around our house: childish behavior is appropriate for children, and it should be expected. So if you don't anticipate that, is that on you or the kid?
Yeah.
And that's we're pretty big on that. But I've noticed with a lot of people, seemingly, safes are so cheap now.
Yeah.
And I don't look at even the big gun safes that are, Liberty safes and stuff like that. They're definitely something that you can get in if you don't care about how much noise you make. 20 minutes in a sledgehammer will have you inside of most of
it. Yeah.
So, but I look at most of the safes that I have, and boxes with locks on it and everything, are for keeping my 3-year-old out of.
Yeah.
So I don't need Fort Knox. She's just 3. She's smart. I'm biased. I know I'm dad, but she's 3. So.
And I think when kids get old enough, like my kids are at an age now, they know what it is. They know the rules. They don't really have a lot of interest in them, because they grew up with them being around, and they're a tool. Okay. You need to respect this tool. And so they know when I carry, because they know I carry a certain way. And where I used to worry about having my my pistol in my console, because the kids might go in there for a charger or something.
Yep.
So for me, I used to not, I never carry. My guns are never loaded with a round in the chamber unless it's in my holster, okay, or in my hands and I'm on a range. Okay. Mm-hmm. Again, gun guys will hate on me for it. Okay. But for me to have those couple extra seconds while I'm driving, okay, the risk reward.
Yeah.
If for whatever reason my kids are just going in to grab a charger, or the charger came loose and it's in the console, or something's in there, they accidentally touch it and pull the trigger. Okay, well, if I don't have to run the chamber, then that's not going to happen. So what's my risk? I'm going to take an extra 2 seconds to be able to just click. Now, if I'm in the car and I'm driving, I should be trying to avoid the gunfight versus connecting in the gunfight.
So, well, you're also in a depending on what you drive, up to a 6,000 to 8,000 pound weapon at that point. So we measure bullet weights and grains typically.
Mm-hmm.
Which is not even an ounce. I measure my car in tonnage. And physics matters. Size and strength actually do matter in real life.
Yeah.
And I don't care what Yoda said in Empire Strikes Back. Like, size and strength do matter.
Yeah.
Some
people like, well, people bring up, well, what if you're at an intersection and the protesters, they surround your car and they're beating on, they're trying to get you out. Well, I think I'll have enough time if I'm not going to drive away. So I mean, most people just panic anyways and just drive. So that should be your first thing. So either you run the people over, or you're going to shoot the people and then run the people over. So which one's going to be your preference?
So I don't think I have it saved anymore, but there's an old from Antifa when they were first getting rolling, and they were actually training their people after that guy got shot, and I want to say it was Austin, by the off-duty Cav member. He was just driving Uber to catch some extra money, and the guy came out with an AK and started to bring the muzzle up, and he's a combat troop, so his muzzle came up first, and he put the guy down. But after that, they actually started disseminating training videos using window breakers and seatbelt cutters to extract people from vehicles. If you ever see any video of anybody getting dragged out of their car by a mob, the minute that they have their ankles leave the car windowsill, watch about the next 30 seconds. It never goes good for the guy that gets dragged out.
Yeah.
Or gal.
Yeah.
People get stomped to death. People get kicked. People get bashed by some of those protest signs that, oh, by the way, this is a 2x4 with a couple of 4-inch screws sticking out of the back of it.
What was that in Seattle? So my sister-in-law was actually up in Seattle for that whole Chad thing.
Oh, nice.
And one of the things they were doing, like, as a like incognito weapons, they would get like Starbucks cups and fill them with concrete.
Yep.
And so you're walking around with essentially a 4-pound brick of concrete, but no one thinks anything of it because it's Seattle. Everybody's got a freaking Starbucks cup. And so these protesters would start launching these things. That the journalist, the Vietnamese guy, Andy Go, or no, however you pronounce the that last name.
That name. Go.
Yeah. So but he got severe brain damage from a Starbucks cup that had concrete in it. And he's still messed up about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's brain damage. It doesn't age like fine wine. It's more like a milk left
out
in an unair-conditioned house type situation. But I saw, and I guess this is kind of segueing into the security stuff. I've watched the BLM. I watched Antifa really closely, and I was looking at them with probably a different set of eyes than most people that I know. Where I'm looking at, okay, how are you guys dressed? Like, how are your tactics evolving?
Did you freeze? I think Aaron froze.
I think so. Oh,
there it is. Yeah,
you're back. Okay.
I'm sitting right next to my router. Like, I don't know why it's in it, but no. So they were disseminating comms protocols for buying burner phones from Walmart. And one of the things that I thought was interesting is they were doing it was a variation on a prison thing called a hot cup, and they'd mix different chemical irritants in a cup, things that would burn your skin and stuff like quicklime or lye or whatever. And they were tossing that stuff at guys in the riot gear because yeah, you are safe, safer in the riot gear, but just as long as it takes to get that crap on, it can take a long time to get it off. And if you've got something running up underneath your plate carrier that's burning the crap out of your skin, there were guys getting 3rd-degree burns from chemicals.
Yeah.
Out there.
Well,
They were also using the frozen water bottles too for a while. The
oh
16
yeah,
ounce
that's
chunk
right.
of
I
ice
remember that.
is,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, when we talked about in the first segment about how tactics evolved in Iraq and Afghanistan and then Ukraine and Russia, I believe the same thing is transpiring within the Antifa type organization communities because
Oh yeah.
Based on what they were doing in the beginning, okay, I'm sure they've learned lessons from that. And you mentioned the burner phones. Well, if there's a lesson to learn from January 6th, okay, not the act of what may have occurred there or not, but what did occur is they did a massive cell tower data dump,
Yep.
In a geographic ring around that whole space. I don't even know if it was all of DC or just X amount of feet, miles from, the capital. And they tracked everybody under the sun that was just there, whether you were in the capital or not in the capital. So
Yep.
now can they
that was
do the same thing with burners? Because if you watch the old show on HBO, The Wire, how they evolved their tactics, okay, when it came to phones, going from beepers and phones and to pictures and stuff like that, and getting burners. You would think with all the criminal activity that occurs, not just in the U.S., worldwide, that they would have put so many safeguards or restrictions in on burners that you can't even use it nefariously. But I haven't researched and tracked that in a while. But I'm wondering, well, can people, how can they avoid that stuff? Can you just buy a burner phone these days, or is everybody relying on Telegram and Signal?
Well, you have people like, one of the things I've noticed with Signal, we had guys that were running overseas informants, and they were using Signal to communicate because in places like Myanmar or some of the other dictatorships that are around, the surveillance technology is built into the infrastructure of the cell phone network, right? So they don't freedom, due process, the First Amendment, they don't have any of that crap. So and they don't care who knows it. Yeah. So having them use Signal, which even for the phone call stuff that has end-to-end encryption, Telegram is pretty freaking compromised by Russia, among other people. But it's still a great place to find a lot of war videos and stuff. But there's a lot of intel gathering that goes on there. But Signal seems to be a pretty decent one on there. And then there's stuff that you can do with Google Voice now, where you can have all kinds of numbers. I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen the scammers. For a while there, before they closed the loophole, they were actually able to call you from your own number. So, like, 817-530-9 or whatever, like, you see that pop up. And the stuff with spoofing and the towers is just crazy now, especially when you start adding in stuff like voice over IP, VoIP communications. But one of the things that was interesting to me as well is, like, it's come out in a couple of mafia indictments that they actually, even with a phone that was turned off, they found a way to turn the phone back on remotely without turning the screen on, using the backup power supply that's in there. So, like, that's when you start seeing some of their burner protocols. And Antifa were really smart. They were using the Mylar bags, which are anti-static bags, to basically block all signal into and out of. And then, so I mean, it's a cheap Faraday cage. But those anti-static bags, they ship all heightened electronic components in them. Try calling somebody, one of these days, with them just tinfoil wrapped around the inside. But, they'd have different, okay, switch to your next phone, don't program any numbers in it. We'll give you a crib sheet on that. You can call, and this is how we'll communicate. And this is under what circumstances you'll do these network switches. And so, it was a detailed program. But the other thing is like, talking about security. So I tell everybody that, like, when we're talking about this stuff, I want to get to low hanging fruit first to develop a certain standard, and then you can go after whatever blows wind up your skirt, and guys will go really off the deep end into one of these pillars usually. And then, as long as they have a baseline of the other ones, where they're not going to be a drag on the community, and they're not going to be a drag on me and endangering, myself and others. Like, that's fine. Everybody has different passions. Some people play golf and it blows my mind. I just don't get it.
Well,
I
think.
Well, finishing the thought real quick though is, like, I tell a lot of these people about stuff like Antifa has a couple of training groups specifically, and things like Redneck Revolt, the John Brown Gun Club, the Huey B. Newton or Huey P. Newton Society.
Yeah. He was an old
all groups that have. Yeah, those are all groups that have training chapters in Florida. They get together on at least a monthly, if not weekly basis to train. They're practicing, small unit tactics, some of them. So, like, if security's off-putting to somebody, or they don't see the need for it, I start mentioning stuff like that. And, dude, these guys are training to be predators.
Yeah.
Like, and they're just a couple of groups, off the top of my head that you have to worry about.
Well,
but I try.
I think preppers really need to understand the evolving tactics of Antifa and not be like, well, I'm not going to go to the cities during those protests. It don't matter to me. Well, as the system collapses, those same people that were Antifa or Antifa adjacent, when all that protest stuff ends, who do you think are going to be some of the marauders, okay, when they ain't got stuff? They're going to use those tactics and skills that they use there and use them in other places. So you can only avoid, this is where the lone wolf prepper thing as a long-term option is a failed strategy. Because you can sit there and say, I just won't be over near the population centers and I won't go near those protests. Well, if the stuff is not solved, okay, they don't put down those protests and the stuff just escalates, those groups are going to go other places, or they push them out of there. So if they're do some kind of a martial law emergency protocol, they're going to secure the areas that are important to them, and they're going to push out all those Antifa types. Well, they're going to go somewhere.
Well, yeah, that's. Look at the Chaz or the Chad or whatever it was called, when it all got shut down, and look at how much they preyed on each other first. If you had a house in that area, I guess you were outvoted, right? Democracy in action, when they decided to declare themselves their own country. But the guy that was one of the big heads of it was actually up in front of one of their little tribunals, because communists love setting up the tribunals, for sexual assault charges within 24 hours after they broke off. So, like, and he's being tried by a jury of his peers, but everybody's in full-on revolution mode. But just the amount of theft and food theft that went in there, sanitation was a huge issue. Because they basically set themselves up to be sieged.
Yeah.
And they had people going in and out, bringing food and stuff, but how many butts on toilets are you going to have on a daily basis? And when you start having sewage in the street because somebody doesn't understand camp sewage protocol, or cleanliness and hygiene protocol, so they, poop into a 5-gallon bucket and dump it out their window like they're back in the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
What
Because
what
even
happens
if
after that?
if the plumbing was still, even if the plumbing was still working, you have such a density of people. People that live there, they're not going to let you in their house.
Yeah. Well, you're basically in an area with everybody who already doesn't follow the rules. So if you have a sanitation protocol that you're trying to put in place and somebody tells you F off, where do you go from there?
Right.
Oh no, he's living his best life. He's going to be, self-actualized over here. No, I need him to wipe his tail so that he doesn't get infected, and then wash his hands when he's cooking food so that he doesn't infect other people. That's, come on, guys. We're allegedly adults,
Right.
but
He's pooping on
that's
the
the kind of,
sidewalk.
what's
I
that?
mean, he's pooping on the sidewalk behind a newspaper box.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
we
Well, I mean,
see.
that's one of the big things in Portland, Oregon, and California. I had a friend of mine send me a thing from San Francisco. He's eating $28 avocado toast, which is like just one fancy piece of toast with an avocado smear on it. It's $28 over in there. And he sends me a picture, and he did it to troll me. So like the toast is in focus, and right behind him is a homeless person that's he's like on this patio, and there's a guy taking a crap, like upwind of this. He's like, yeah, this is a great state. I'm like, sure, that's, I don't know about $28 for toast with an avocado on it. I definitely don't know about being in full view of a grown man taking a grown man poop.
Yeah, no,
where I'm trying to eat. But and that kind of brings it, I mean, that's another one of the security concerns. Like if you're in a grid down scenario and one of those neighbors, let's say, decides that he's going to go wash himself in the retention pond or poop in the retention pond. It's like, hey man, this is everybody's water. Well, what do you do if he tells you to go, take a long walk off a short bridge?
Yeah.
What's your recourse? If society's breaking down at that point, we have to go back to some older ways of doing things, which is, really wish you wouldn't, bud. Really wish you wouldn't. Okay, now I'm not asking you anymore.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people miss that when it comes to security, they just think of, guns and skills. Okay. But it's having protocols to understand what's transpiring. Earlier we were talking about water, and just think about in an HOA, the average person, what do they have in their house that can hold some water? I mean, you literally, I can envision people walking out with pots and pans, okay, and maybe what probably in every house is one of those hard plastic totes with a cover.
Yep.
Now, someone's not going to compute that water is heavy. Every gallon is 8 pounds, and someone's going to walk out with a tote and thinking they're going to use their little pot, fill it up, and they're going to carry it back.
Yep.
So that's going to create frustration and tension. They're going to waste the water. It's going to spill all over the place. And so then I got to make more trips. And then, someone's going to try to take advantage of it. Why am I going to walk down there and take the risk of somebody doing something to me? I'll wait till you get close to his house, and then I'll take it from him.
Well, and how many local warlords have probably started throughout history with something very similar to the saying, I'm tired of carrying my own water. Why don't you do it for me? Or I'll hit you with this freaking stick.
Yeah. I'll provide security around this neighborhood.
Yeah.
Let's do the support walls.
Well, that's, I never want to be in a position where I have to explain to my wife that she's now our wife. Everybody, that's really, there's really, with a lot of the people that get into this, conversation, when I start talking to them about this stuff, I'm like, the first thing is to figure out what you would be willing to fight over. and what you would be willing to use those tools and that training over. And then after that, we'll figure out ways to protect that. Avoidance and de-escalation is ideal.
Yeah.
Some folks just won't have it any other way.
Yeah.
And they get a vote too. So some of the people that I know that are very optimistic about what their fellow man will do when their back's up against the wall. It's a little concerning to me.
Yeah.
Especially if they're in my area, because I'd rather everybody be able to take care of themselves. That way I don't have to. And if there's 50 speed bumps in my town, that's a lot better than just being the one speed bump that you have to put in front of everything. So then I try to get people to carry a tool for self-defense.
Yeah.
And I mean, everybody starts out at a different spot with that. Like, I had one lady, I remember one of the first groups we were at, and after a year, she was still thinking that she was going to use a BB gun that was very realistic, that she had taken the little orange tip and painted it black, and that was her defense. I was like, you're a single woman who lives alone, and you're going to have a BB gun and a bunch of high-value items in your house. You're really out of shape. Like, you're carrying, about an extra 60 pounds, which may not help with the dating stuff. But what are you going to do 3 months in when you're not losing any weight and everybody else around you has lost a lot?
Mm-hmm.
Is that BB gun going to help you, decide how much of your food is our food? Or, is somebody going to call your bluff, you get shot with it, and then they're going to be ticked and put that they're going to stick that BB gun somewhere that might surprise you.
Yeah. It's like that thing. Oh, once they hear the racking of the shotgun, then they'll know I'm serious and they'll just take off. No. You'll be lucky if you get the boom before they take the gun from you.
So shotguns it's actually kind of funny that you mentioned that, because I was going to mention it earlier. Shotguns are the only weapon that I store without a round in the chamber. I have other ways of securing the other stuff, but if you look at the shotguns, they're not drop safe. So like the Remington 870s and the Mossberg 500 series, if you look at the internals on there, that little button just disengages the trigger from being able to be pulled. It doesn't do anything to isolate the firing pin from striking the primer.
Okay.
So they used to call that, people would store it and the cops would do it, and they'd call it what's called cruiser ready. So they'd have the tube loaded with whatever it was loaded with, and a lot of them would run the pump back. So all they had to do was run that pump forward, and they were good to go. Some guys would just skip the staging the pump with the idea of if they had a bad car accident that they were in, they didn't want a weapon that could potentially be loaded flying around inside the cab of the vehicle. So it's reasonable. Everybody's going to have their own concerns on that. But once I get people carrying ideally a firearm or working towards carrying a firearm, emphasizing safe gun handling as much as humanly possible, to build those good habits in early. And like those people that say those three things that I mentioned, I grew up around guns. Don't worry, my relative's a cool guy, and I'm a used to be. Those are the top three offenders when it comes to range safety violations. They'll sit there and they'll screw with their guns and everything, and they'll muzzle flag you while they're running the slide with a magazine in.
God.
And you're like, dude, your fingers in the trigger. Fingers in the trigger. All right, dude, you want to see an at-speed pistol disarm? Take your freaking booger hook off the freaking bang switch. Like, that's where, with a lot of this stuff, like building those good habits in, and then you can get to all the Gucci stuff, like, the Instagram influencers and running your, failure stop drills and everything. Just basic marksmanship and carrying their daggum gun on them every day is huge.
Being aware, make it part of your body. So it feels natural, not alien.
Yep. Well, there's been so many advances in concealed carry gear recently, with even like holster systems like the Enigma coming out, where there's really not much excuse not to, unless you're legally mandated not to, and you're in a place where they're going to check. But always have something on you.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, once you get people up to those levels, like there's still some other stuff to do. But if you've got 30 days of food in your house, if you've got 30 days of water in your house, if you have a way to, you've hardened your shelter and you've dealt with normal threats to it like fire, and you've got a plan of action in place for, or ideally a couple of backup plans as well. And, you're carrying a firearm that you've practiced with recently, and you're, a safe, gun handler, and you carry that firearm on you. Just those little things, like how far ahead does that put the average person from a lot of the other members in the community?
A lot.
Yeah. And then you can build on all of that. But that's a really good foundation to be able to build on. Right after that, I usually get somebody to take a medical class.
Yeah.
And, I've got a gunshot wounded trauma class coming up. The guy Franklin Riddle, I try to get him to teach one every year, at least one. And I try to get everybody who I'm in, who I train with, to go. Because if I'm going to be around live firearms with you, I'd love it if you were able to save me if I need it.
Yeah.
Saving you is cool, but like, I love me some me. So saving me is vital. It's non-negotiable. And then having them with, starting to get the med gear and stuff. Now you've got somebody who's well balanced, and they'll usually find something that they enjoy. But most preppers do, something they just absolutely geek out about. I have friends of mine that are into ham radios way more than I think it's healthy. I have friends that are freaking gun nuts, that have more guns than most of the other people I know, and I mostly hang out with vets. But, everybody finds something. But the baseline is, to me, that's non-negotiable.
Yeah.
Like, you don't just get to do the fun stuff that interests you. If you're going to be part of a group, that's where you start developing standards, and you start building community, and then you hold each other accountable for, wait, dude, I thought we talked about this. No more cases of 5.56 coming to your house until you have 30 freaking days of shelf-stable stuff and a way to cook it all.
Yeah.
Like, we got to get that dealt with, because we're boys and everything, but if you come out and you think you're going to take food out of my family's mouths when you knew about this beforehand, like, you and I are going to have a real tough conversation. It's probably going to be pretty direct.
Yeah, because you're looking more like a marauder.
Well, end with, no, you can't have my daughter's food. Yeah. Oh, I have guns. I can get whatever I need. Okay, well, I'll treat you differently should we come across each other after a crisis event then.
All right. Let me do some closing here. We're at the 2 hours and 50-minute mark. It's pretty good. We could probably keep going, but we got to keep this shorter. Brendan, I want to give you your opportunity. What was that? Brendan, I wanted to give you an opportunity to close out with anything, bring up any points, ask any questions.
Aaron and I have the same thought process on a lot of stuff. So
I make a good neighbor.
Yeah. So I do the exact same thing. I was getting ready to counter you when you started with the water, because you specified 1 gallon of drinking water. And I was waiting for you to finish so I could go, no, really, you need 3, because I do a bunch of stuff. And then you finished it off. And
yeah.
So I do the same thing. I recommend everybody, if you're absolutely at 0, start with 30 days, 30 days of dried grains, 30 days. So usually I'll tell people start out with like a Life Straw or a Sawyer Mini for a water filter and security. I tell people a shotgun. The reason being is because you could throw birdshot in it and kill a quail. You could throw a slug in it and kill anything in North America. keep your buckshot for home defense as a baseline. And then work up from there, 30 days, 90 days, 6 months, 1 year, so on and so forth. Yeah, you and I have the same thought process on a lot of stuff, it seems.
It must be a Plant City thing, you two.
Right?
For me, it's a growing up poor thing, but
yeah, dirt road in Dover, man.
yeah, I joke with people. It's not a joke, but I'm old enough that I can laugh at about it now. Everybody's like, "When did you first pack your first bug out bag?" I was like, "I was 12," but I didn't know it was called a bug out bag. So I just grabbed all my camo clothes and hatchet and some machetes that I had and threw them in a duffel bag. Started walking down the road. That's when my mom kicked me out of the house for the first time when I was 12. So that actually started a whole like trend where every time that we'd have an argument or she'd have a bad day or she'd get frustrated with me, that was always where it was going to end. It was get out, get out. So, you learn to be self-reliant from an early age. Also how to talk to people that are from way different backgrounds where it's like, dude, you don't like, how many knives do you carry on you? People are surprised to find out that I have more than one. And I'm like, no, one for them to find, one for you to keep. I thought that was the rule. But so it just makes sense after doing this for a while.
Yeah. All right, cool. Aaron, do you have any other final thoughts? Anything else?
Yeah, man, this has been great. I probably rambled a little bit much, but it's definitely a passion of mine. So especially helping new people out, and if I can, hopefully with those first 4 pillars, if somebody hears that from that's just starting out and prepping, and I can keep them from making some of the same mistakes that I've seen others do or I've even made myself. People get that security blanket ripped away, and they go out and they know that they can buy their way back into comfort and security. So they just buy a bunch of crap that they don't know how to use and don't need. That was the old joke when prepping first started to become a word that was in common usage. So a prepper is just somebody that has a bunch of cases of Mountain House food in the garage, rather than like a jet ski that they know that they're never going to drive or ride. So it's a yuppie with a different collection of junk than everybody else in the subdivision.
Oh yeah.
It's been nice to see skills get focused on more, to see people get more reasonable, to see gear evolve and make more sense. Because that's the whole reason why I work with other preppers. Because if there's just one of me and I'm the only one that I have, the stuff that I have, like, I'm a high value target. But if I can reproduce myself 50 or 100 times, now my community is way more resilient. We can afford to help others. But help starts at home.
Yeah.
So, with Brendan, living close by, like, I'd love to have know that there was 1,000 Brendans in this community that I live in. Because I'm not as worried about hurricanes at that point. I'm not as worried about civil unrest or whatever.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the great things that I've experienced connecting with people is connecting with quality people, so you have a baseline of knowing when you of who's worth pursuing in a friendship. Okay. Like anything else in life, and when you do find those people and you're able to make those connections, it's best to share that with other people, which is kind of one of the premises of doing this podcast. It's another extension of building tribe. Building tribe is building friendships, developing relationships, helping each other, playing community. Now we're doing it for fun and interest. But come someday, we'll be in an emergency situation or situations where these connections, these skills will pay dividends for us. And it may not be, Brendan doing tribe with me by my house because we live so far away. Okay. But I have experience and skills okay, in the things that you need in the pillars of preparedness and interacting with people, I can scale from 0 people that are around me, and you guys can do the same thing, you know? And then there's times where, what are the odds, okay, that I connect with 2 people, okay, that have similar interests, okay, like yourselves, and you live in the same area, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And through this great podcast, we're able to, you know, make an introduction connection to you guys, and try to do that with other people. Plus, in how many spaces in the podcast world are they having just regular conversations? Okay. They're not selling gear. Okay. Not promoting subscriptions. You know, it'd be nice to make money and stuff like that. But we do this for fun, but we do it for community to help others, to
Yeah.
show that there is a different way. You can prepare yourself, okay, and you can help prepare others. So that's
That's
my
what I
last.
love about
Yeah.
this whole subject is normalizing prepping
Yeah.
and making it more accessible. So, like, you know, I've got a bunch of books. I've mentioned being a nerd several times in this podcast. I'm a regular dude and a husband, a father. You know, I'm not Rambo running around with grease paint smeared all over my feet, my face, and you know, a K-bar clenched between my teeth in the woods. You know, eating bugs off of trees and stuff.
Yeah.
Um, like it's normal, and to me, that all this stuff was normal 50 or 100 years ago, where you were considered a normal part of society if you were self-reliant and approaching self-sufficiency. The self-reliance is just a mindset.
Yeah.
But you know, if you had your ways to provide for your own food, water, shelter, and security, you were considered a normal member of society, and you could be interacted with, and you know, people would hang out with you. Now, if you know, mention at the wrong party that you have your own food, water, shelter, and security, and you're working on bettering that, you know, with a constant improvement basis, people look at you like you're weird, dude. And you're not invited to parties. You know, you become the crazy neighbor, and all your neighbors, when they do the news article on you, they'd be like, "Who's a quiet guy? He really stuck to himself." Yeah, because everybody thought I was weird and never invited me anywhere. So changing that and making it reasonable, and being the guy next door with a lot of this stuff, I think it's a huge community boost.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
most people think about this stuff at some level, especially in Florida with hurricanes.
yeah. Well, a lot of people in the space are very surface level, so I agree with you. It's like you, I, and Brendan, we all nerd out in our own ways on particular topics, where I think your average preparedness guy does not. Okay. They're just really buying gear, hoarding stuff, and watching memes and, click, 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 click on the forums, you know? Um, it makes all the difference. And I think just look, our conversations that we have in person, and on the podcast, you can see the depth and breadth of knowledge that all of us have in our own ways, where you don't see that in the average prepper. So I would like to have our podcast set the example for others that find those areas of interest and nerd out in them. You'll enjoy preparedness better, and you'll be a better prepper, because you'll get rid of all the fluff about preparedness that gets fed to us. But
well, you
all right,
stop waiting. Get out there and actually meet some of these people face to face.
Yeah, stop worrying about you're on a list or someone's a Fed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't worry, everybody's on at least one list if you're living right.
Exactly. All right. All right. We will close out tonight's episode. This was a long one, 3 hours. I think this was the longest for two guys making tribe. But that's all right. That just shows you the quality conversations we were having, and for many more to come in the future. I thank everyone for listening. We are at, I think, 30 subscribers now. More people have watched the videos than watched the videos and subscribed. I still got to learn this social media thing, but please, if you're following this episode or any of the episodes, please just subscribe. Shows that we're doing the right thing. and you guys are enjoying it, throw some comments in any of the videos. Pop me an email. We'd love to hear your feedback and see how we can improve this. All right. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Have a great week, and we'll see you in the next episode. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please remember to like and subscribe and share with your friends. We will see you next time.